Hey guys, picture this. In the misty rivers of ancient Japan, women in flowing robes sing haunting melodies from boats, luring men not with promises of eternal love, but with a night that could bankrupt a samurai or shatter a soul. Welcome to the absurd, heartbreaking world of medieval Japan's forgotten prostitutes, where beauty was a curse and survival a cruel joke. Before you get comfortable, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. Medieval Japan, the land of cherry blossoms, stoic warriors, and poetry that could make a stone weep. But beneath that poetic veneer, a nightmare factory where women were commodities, traded like rice sacks in a famine. We're talking Heian period, folks, that golden age from 794 to 1185, when the court in Kyoto was all about elegant robes, incense parties, and pretending the world outside wasn't a brutal slog. Enter the Yujo, those women of pleasure who weren't exactly frolicking in fields of freedom. No, these ladies were the original multitaskers, entertainers, singers, dancers, and yes, providers of services that would make your modern dating app blush. But let's not romanticize it, because history loves to slap a pretty filter on horror shows. Imagine you're a peasant girl, maybe 7 years old, and your family's crops have failed again because the gods apparently hate farmers. Dad's got debts piling up like autumn leaves, and mom's whispering about opportunities in the big city. Next thing you know, you're sold to a brothel owner for a handful of coins. Absurd, right? But in Heian Japan, this was just Tuesday. These girls weren't born into silk. They were dragged from poverty-stricken villages where famine and taxes turned families into reluctant human traffickers. The irony? Society viewed prostitution not as a sin. Oh no, Buddhist influences back then were surprisingly chill about sex, but as a necessary evil, a way to keep the social order humming. Men could indulge, women could, well, survive. Barely. Let's zoom in on the asobi, those siren-like figures who kicked off this twisted tradition. These weren't your average streetwalkers. Oh, heavens no. The asobi started as priestesses, believe it or not. Holy women performing funeral rites for the imperial court, dancing and chanting to soothe angry spirits and ensure the dead didn't come back to haunt the living. Tax exempt with direct access to royal coffins, they were revered, almost divine. Their patron, Ame no Uzume, the goddess who stripped and danced to lure Amaterasu out of her cave, saving the world from eternal darkness. Talk about a resume. But here's the historical absurdity. As Buddhism rolled in from China, monopolizing funerals and pushing native Shinto beliefs to the sidelines, these priestesses lost their gig. Confucianism piled on, scorning women who didn't produce useful things like kids or crops. So what do you do when your sacred job evaporates? Pivot to entertainment, of course. And entertainment in Heian meant blending art with allure. By the 10th century, asobi were cruising the Yodo River in Kyoto, perched on boats like floating stages, belting out imayo songs, those catchy, folksy tunes about love, nature, and longing. Picture it, a samurai fresh from some petty court intrigue hears a melody wafting over the water. Follow me, the song whispers, echoing ancient Greek myths but with a Japanese twist. He'd row out, enchanted, only to find himself negotiating not just for a song, but for companionship that could last the night. Absurd? Absolutely. These women were sirens without the shipwrecks, using their voices to hook clients in broad daylight. No shame, no hiding. Prostitution was socially acceptable then, as long as it didn't disrupt the rice harvest or family duties. But the pain? Oh, it's there, lurking like a shadow puppet. These asobi lived on the margins, low in the social hierarchy, their bodies currency in a world where men held all the coins. What do you think? Could you imagine singing for your supper, literally, while society pats itself on the back for being enlightened? Drop a comment below with your thoughts. I'd love to hear if this surprises you, or if you've got a modern parallel. Fast forward a bit in the Heian era, and we meet the shirabyoshi, those white-robed dancers who turned heads and broke hearts. Dressed in men's hakama pants and suiken robes, scandalous cross-dressing for the time. They performed slow, hypnotic dances to the beat of drums and flutes. Famous ones like Shizuka Gozen or Jio became legends, mistresses to powerful men like Minamoto no Yoritomo, the first shogun. But here's the sarcasm dripping in. These talented women were often yujo in disguise, their artistry a thin veil over the reality of sexual services. Society adored them for their grace, their waka poetry that rivaled court ladies, but ignored the bruises, the unwanted pregnancies, the syphilis that started creeping in from Chinese traders around 1505. Wait, that's later, but the seeds were sown early in Heian courts, where polygamy was the norm and emperors collected wives like trading cards. Yujo filled the gaps. Noblemen wrote diaries gushing about their encounters, but the women? Silent ghosts in history. We have fragments, poems and anthologies like the Manyoshu, where a yujo laments her fleeting youth. Like the dew on the grass, my life evaporates under the sun of desire. Poetic, sure, but translate that to reality. Venereal diseases ravaging. Bodies, no antibiotics, just herbal remedies that probably tasted like regret. And the debt bondage? Brutal. Girls signed contracts, or had them signed for them, indentured for years, working off debts that ballooned with every kimono or meal provided by the brothel. Escape? Ha! You'd be hunted down like a runaway fox spirit. Let's paint a scene, shall we? It's a crisp autumn evening in Kyoto. The Kamo River glitters under lantern light. An asobi named Hana, let's call her that since history forgot most names, steps onto her boat, her voice rising like mist. "O traveler, come float with me where worries dissolve like sakura petals." A merchant bites, boards, and what follows is a mix of conversation, sake, and intimacy that's as transactional as a modern vending machine. But behind the smile? Hana's thinking of her starving siblings back home, the pimp who takes 80% of her earnings, the client who might turn violent if the mood sours. Survival's pain wrapped in silk. Ironic, because while court ladies like Murasaki Shikibu pen tales of romance in The Tale of Genji, Yujo lived the gritty sequel no one wanted to read. And the absurdity amps up. These women were often attached to temples and shrines, blurring sacred and profane. In early Heian, some Yujo operated out of religious sites, their earnings funding rituals. Imagine tithing with a tumble. Buddhism's casual attitude towards sex meant no hellfire sermons, just karma points for generosity. But as the period wore on, regulations tightened. By late Heian, brothels clustered in port towns like Sakai, patronized by Korean and Chinese visitors, spreading exotic diseases and ideas. The elite frowned but indulged. Hypocrisy was the real national sport. Comment time. If you were a Yujo in Heian, Japan, what skill would you master to survive? Singing, dancing, or poetry? Let me know below and maybe share if this makes you rethink those romantic samurai movies. Transitioning to the Kamakura period, 1185 to 1333, things get even more warrior-flavored. The Minamoto clan topples the courtly Heian vibe, ushering in shoguns and samurai who preferred swords over sonnets. But Yujo? They adapt like chameleons in a storm. Now, prostitution shifts from riverboats to roadside inns and post stations, where travelers needed rest. Absurdity alert. The Kamakura shogunate, all about Bushido honor, turned a blind eye to brothels as long as they didn't disrupt military. Drills. Women kidnapped from villages, yes, outright snatched, filled the ranks, sold into a life of servitude. One record from the time mentions a woman appealing to authorities, claiming filial piety. "I'm here for my parents' sake." Early on, it worked. Courts sometimes freed them. But irony strikes. By mid-period, attitudes hardened. Women were now autonomous, so if you're in a brothel, you chose it, you lascivious profit-seeker. No more victim status, just blame the woman. Shirabyoshi dancers peak here, becoming courtesans to warlords. Shizuka Gozen's story, heart-wrenching. Lover to Yoshitsune, captured by his brother Yoritomo, forced to dance for her captors while pregnant. She defies them with a loyal song, gets exiled, child killed, pure tragedy masked as romance. The pain of survival. These women navigated power plays, where one wrong lover meant death. Diseases spread, syphilis hits hard, disfiguring beauties who once commanded fortunes. Brothels became disease dens with no medical mercy. Let's sarcasm this. Samurai, paragons of virtue, preaching loyalty while frequenting Yujo houses. Honor on the battlefield, debauchery off it, the ultimate double standard. And the economic angle? Prostitution boosted trade, ports thrived on foreign sailors' coins. But for the women, it's endless nights, fake smiles, real tears. A Muromachi tale, jumping ahead a tad, calls Izumi Shikibu an elegant courtesan, romanticizing her wanderings. Reality? Wandering meant homelessness, vulnerability. In Kamakura, Yujo hierarchies emerge, top ones educated in arts, lower ones mere bodies. The absurdity, training girls in calligraphy and tea ceremony, only for them to serve brutes who couldn't tell a haiku from a hiccup. Pain, short lifespans, abortions with risky herbs, suicides when debts crushed hope. What about you? Does this warrior era's hypocrisy remind you of anything today? Comment your take. As we edge into Muromachi, 1336 to 1573, chaos reigns. Ashikaga shoguns in Kyoto, civil wars everywhere. Yujo? They multiply like rabbits in a fox-free field. Pleasure quarters formalize, precursors to Edo's Yoshiwara. Women from war-torn areas flood in, sold by desperate kin. Absurd. Amid battles, men still found time for relaxation. Courtesans influence fashion, elaborate hair, layered kimonos, but it's a facade. Behind screens, abuse, exploitation. Muromachi tales romanticize Yujo, wicked stepmothers selling daughters, echoing fairy tales but with real blood. One story, a Yujo redeems herself through piety, but most ended in obscurity. Pain, debt servitude intensifies, contracts binding for decades. Syphilis ravages, no cure, just suffering. Sarcasm, Japan's floating world starts bubbling, but for Yujo it's sinking. Buddhist views shift, sex now more taboo, yet brothels boom. Irony at its finest, engage. Imagine scripting a Yujo's diary. What would she write? Comment ideas. This is just the tip of the iceberg, folks. The forgotten lives of these women weren't glamorous. They were a sarcastic punchline to history's cruel joke. Survival meant enduring absurdity, pain woven into every silken thread. Stay tuned for part 2, where we dive deeper into the hierarchies and heartbreaks. But before you go, smash that like if this hooked you, subscribe for more historical dives, and comment your location and time. Let's build this global time travel community. What shocked you most so far? Tell me below. Buckle up, time travelers, because we're diving back into the gritty, absurd underbelly of medieval Japan, where the lives of prostitutes, Yujo, asobi, shirabyoshi, were less floating world romance and more a survival gauntlet wrapped in silk and sarcasm. We left off in the chaotic Muromachi period, where warlords clashed, shoguns partied, and women paid the price for society's endless appetites. Let's crank up the irony, sprinkle in some historical absurdity, and wade through the pain of survival for part 2 of this saga. Ready to feel equal parts horrified and entertained? Let's go. The Muromachi period, 1336 to 1573, is like Japan's teenage rebellion phase. War everywhere, shoguns barely holding it together, and a cultural obsession with beauty masking a rotting core. Picture Kyoto's streets, where samurai swagger with swords, merchants hustle, and Yujo navigate a world that venerates their talents while spitting on their existence. The pleasure quarters are forming now, proto-Yoshiwara districts where women are caged in plain sight. These aren't the glamorous geisha of later Edo fantasies. Oh no, these are women caught in a system where their bodies are currency, their artistry a cruel bait and switch. Want absurdity? The same society that wrote haiku about fleeting cherry blossoms treated these women as disposable as fallen petals, yet expected them to perform like goddesses. Comment below. Does this double standard remind you of any modern hypocrisy? I'm curious. Let's meet Akiko, not her real name, because history's a thief that steals identities. Akiko's a shirabyoshi dancer, one of the elite Yujo, trained in poetry, flute, and those hypnotic dances that could make a warlord forget his battle plans. She's in a Muromachi pleasure house, maybe near the Kamo River, dressed in white robes and men's hakama, a style that screams rebellion but really just screams, look at me, I'm marketable. Her clients? Ashikaga shoguns, samurai fresh from slaughtering rebels, maybe a monk or two who forgot their vows. The irony? These men wax poetic about her grace, scribbling in diaries about her ethereal charm. But when the candles dim, it's a transaction, not a love story. Akiko's paid in rice or coin, most of which goes to her madam, who's got a ledger thicker than a temple scroll. Debt bondage is the game Akiko owes for her training, her kimonos, her food, even the straw mat she sleeps on. Escape? Might as well ask the moon to fall. Here's the pain. Akiko's maybe 20, but her body's aging like she's 40. Syphilis, that uninvited guest from Chinese trade routes, is creeping through the pleasure quarters. No antibiotics, just herbal concoctions that burn going down and do nothing for the sores. Pregnancy? A constant risk, with abortions done by crude methods. Think willow bark and prayers, with a side of agony. Some Yujo bear children, only to see them sold or abandoned. Survival's a daily gamble. Dodge violent clients, avoid starvation, and pray the next war doesn't burn down your brothel. Yet, Akiko's expected to smile, sing, and seduce because the show must go on. Absurd, right? Society's like, dance, girl, but don't expect respect. Drop a comment. What would you do to survive in Akiko's shoes? I want to hear your strategies. Now, let's zoom out to the bigger picture. The Muromachi economy is a mess. Wars drain the coffers, but pleasure quarters? Booming. Ports like Sakai and Hyogo are buzzing with Korean and Chinese traders who bring coin, culture, and disease. Yujo are economic engines, their earnings propping up local markets. Sarcasm alert. Nothing says stable society like profiting off women's suffering, while samurai lecture about honor. Some Yujo climb the ranks, becoming courtesans to daimyo, their names whispered in court. Think Kogo of Narihira, whose poetry rivaled the elite. But most, nameless, faceless, their stories erased unless they're tragic enough to inspire a no play. One tale from the time. A Yujo saves her family by selling herself, only to be betrayed by a lover who leaves her for a proper wife. Romantic? Nope. It's a gut punch, a reminder that loyalty was a luxury these women couldn't afford. The absurdity peaks with the religious angle. Buddhist temples, those bastions of enlightenment, often ran side hustles with Yujo. Some shrines employed them for rituals, sex as a sacred act supposedly. But as Muromachi leans harder into Confucian ideals, women's status tanks. Sex becomes less spiritual and more shameful, yet brothels thrive. Irony thicker than miso soup. Monks preach detachment while sampling the goods. And the shogunate? They're too busy fighting to regulate much, so pleasure quarters grow like weeds. Regulations start creeping in, though. By the late 15th century, officials demand Yujo wear distinct sashes, a scarlet letter to mark them. Humiliation is policy. Charming. Let's paint a scene. It's 1450, a smoky tavern in Sakai. A Yujo named Sumi strums a biwa, her fingers callous but nimble. Her song's about a lost love, but her eyes scan the room for danger. A drunk samurai's hand on his sword, a merchant eyeing her like livestock. She's 16, sold to the tavern owner after her village was raised in a petty daimyo feud. Her contract says she'll be free in 10 years, but interest on her debt keeps piling up. Last week she saw a friend die from a botched abortion. Yesterday a client broke her wrist. Tonight she performs, because stopping means starvation. The crowd claps, oblivious to her pain. That's survival, swallowing fear to charm men who will forget her name by dawn. Comment challenge. If you were Sumi, what song would you sing to keep your spirit alive? Share your pick below. I'm dying to know. As wars rage, Yujo become pawns in power games. Daimyo gift high-ranking courtesans to allies, sealing deals with human collateral. Absurd? Oh yes. Imagine being a diplomatic bargaining chip, your body a treaty clause. Some Yujo gain influence. Rumors swirl of courtesans whispering battle strategies in bed, but it's a tightrope. One wrong word, one jealous wife, and you're exiled or worse. Pain. These women navigate a world where men hold every blade, literal and metaphorical. Disease spreads faster now. Smallpox joins syphilis, scarring faces and ending careers. Life expectancy? Maybe 25 if you're lucky. No retirement plan, just a hope to die before you're too broken to work. The cultural irony stings. Muromachi's the birthplace of no theater, tea ceremonies, and Zen gardens. Yet Yujo are both muses and outcasts. Poets like Sogi praise their beauty in waka, but society scorns them. A Yujo's poem from the time, My body a bridge over troubled waters, crossed but never cherished. Poetic, sure, but it's code for exploitation. Brothels are now multi-tiered, elite houses with educated courtesans, mid-tier for merchants, and squalid dens for peasants. The hierarchy's absurd. Your worth depends on how well you fake refinement, but even the top Yujo are slaves to debt. Let's talk war's impact. The Onin War, 1467 to 1477, trashes Kyoto, leaving Yujo scrambling. Some flee to port towns, others are kidnapped by soldiers. Absurdity. Amid burning temples, men still seek pleasure. Yujo adapt, setting up makeshift brothels and war camps. Survival's pain, servicing men who might kill you tomorrow, smiling through trauma. Some Yujo turn to banditry, joining rogue groups. Imagine a shirabyoshi wielding a stolen katana. Rare, but badass. Comment, would you join the bandits or stick to the brothel for survival? Let's hear your choice. As Muromachi crumbles, the Azuchi Momoyama period looms, 1573 to 1603. Oda Nobunaga's unifying Japan, and pleasure quarters get a makeover. Absurd, warlords like Nobunaga patronize Yujo while burning rivals' lands. Courtesans like Lady Yodo become political players, but most Yujo still expendable. Syphilis is now a full-blown epidemic. One record estimates half of Kyoto's Yujo are infected by 1580. No cure, just disfigurement and death. Pain. Women are blamed for spreading it, not the men who demand their services. Regulations tighten. Toyotomi Hideyoshi, Nobunaga's successor, starts licensing brothels, trapping Yujo in legal cages. Sarcasm time. Nothing says progress like taxing women for their suffering while samurai play hero. Pleasure quarters are walled off, a preview of Edo's Yoshiwara. Yujo are now spectacles paraded in cages for clients to gawk at, like a zoo, but with less dignity. Survival means enduring public shame, physical decay, and the constant threat of violence. Yet, some Yujo shine. A courtesan named Yuki, possibly apocryphal, allegedly saves a daimyo's life with her wit, earning freedom. Exceptions, not the rule. Most end like moths in a flame, burned out, forgotten. Engage. If you could give one Muromachi Yujo a modern tool to fight back, say a smartphone or a lawyer, what would it be? Comment your idea. This roller coaster of absurdity and pain sets the stage for Edo's infamous Yoshiwara, but that's for part 3. The Muromachi Yujo lived in a world that praised their art while crushing their souls, a sarcastic twist on culture. Stay tuned for more heartbreak, more irony, and more reasons to marvel at their resilience. Hit like if this gripped you, subscribe for the next dive, and comment your location and time. Where are you watching from? What's the wildest historical fact you learned today? Spill it below, and let's keep this time travel party going. We're in the Azuchi Momoyama period, where Japan's trying to pull itself out of Muromachi's war-torn mess. Castles rise, swords clash, and the Yujo? They're still the unsung engines of the economy, their bodies fueling trade while society pretends they're just entertainers. The absurdity's thick. Oda Nobunaga, the Demon King himself, burns temples to crush Buddhist power, but doesn't bat an eye. At pleasure quarters thriving under his nose, his successor, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, takes it up a notch, formalizing brothels like a bureaucrat with a fetish for control. By the late 16th century, pleasure districts are less freewheeling and more like dystopian theme parks, structured, regulated, and oh so profitable. Comment below. Does this early urban planning for vice surprise you, or is it just history being predictably grim? Let's meet Yuki, not her real name, because history's still stingy with records. She's a high-ranking courtesan in a proto-Yoshiwara district, maybe in Kyoto or Sakai. Yuki's got it all: calligraphy skills, a voice that could charm a tanuki, and a wardrobe of silk kimonos that costs more than a farmer's yearly harvest. She's the rock star of her time, entertaining daimyo and wealthy merchants who drop coin for her wit and, well, everything else. But here's the sarcastic kicker: Yuki's freedom is a mirage. Her madam owns her soul, thanks to a debt contract that grows faster than bamboo in monsoon season. Every poem she writes, every shamisen note she plucks, adds to her debt for training and upkeep. Survival's pain? Yuki's maybe 18, but her body's clock is ticking. Syphilis is now a full-blown epidemic, and no amount of herbal tonics can stop the sores creeping up her skin. Picture a night in Yuki's world. It's 1585, and the lanterns flicker in a pleasure quarter near Osaka's port. Yuki's in a tatami room, serving sake to a daimyo who's boasting about his latest castle siege. She laughs at his jokes, her smile a practiced mask, but her mind's on the client last week who got rough, or the friend who vanished after a failed abortion. The room smells of incense and sweat, and Yuki's heart pounds as she calculates one wrong move and she's beaten or worse. Outside, the district hums. Other yujos sing, clients haggle, and pimps count coins. Absurdity alert. This is a cultural hub where art and exploitation share a futon. Yuki's poems might end up in an anthology, but her name? Erased, unless she's lucky enough to be a mistress to someone like Hideyoshi himself. Speaking of Hideyoshi, let's talk power and hypocrisy. This peasant-turned-warlord loves his courtesans. Lady Yodo, anyone? She's a yujo who climbs to concubine status, birthing Hideyoshi's heir and wielding real influence. But for every Yodo, there's 1,000 nameless women trapped in the grind. Hideyoshi's big idea? License brothels, tax them, and lock them in walled districts. By 1589, Kyoto's got a proto-Yoshiwara, a fortified pleasure zone where yujo are paraded like livestock in a market. Sarcasm time. Nothing screams progress like turning human trafficking into a government-sanctioned business model. Comment: if you were Hideyoshi, would you regulate or abolish this system? Hit me with your take below. The pain deepens. Syphilis, that gift from global trade, is now a death sentence. Records from the 1580s suggest up to half of urban yujo are infected, their beauty fading into scars and madness. No penicillin, just mercury-based cures that poison faster than they heal. Pregnancy's another minefield. Clients don't care about consequences, and abortion methods are brutal. Think needles, toxic herbs, and prayers to gods who aren't listening. Some yujo raise kids in brothels only to see them sold into the same life. Survival means enduring this cycle, smiling through the terror, and hoping you don't die before your debt's paid. Average lifespan, mid-20s if you're lucky. No sick days, no retirement, just a race against time. Let's zoom out to the absurdity of the era's culture. Azuchi Momoyama's a golden age for art. Tea ceremonies, screen paintings, no theater. But yujo are both muses and victims. They inspire plays and poems, yet live like caged birds. A famous courtesan, Oichi, might charm a warlord with a dance, but her sister's married to Nobunaga, so she's a political pawn too. One misstep, and she's exiled or executed. Irony. The same men who write love poems to yujo scorn them in public, their wives spitting venom at those women. Society's split personality is on full display. Venerate the art, vilify the artist. Engage time. Imagine you're a yujo writing a secret letter to a friend. What's one thing you'd confess? Drop it in the comments. I'm curious to see your creativity. Now, let's hit the streets, or rather, the post stations and port towns. As Hideyoshi unifies Japan, travel booms, and so do roadside brothels. These aren't fancy pleasure quarters, they're gritty inns where yujo serve travelers, from samurai to peddlers. Absurdity. The shogunate regulates these like toll booths, complete with official fees. Women are often kidnapped from war-ravaged villages, sold to innkeepers for a pittance. A 1590s record tells of a girl, maybe 14, pleading for release, citing filial piety. The court's response: "You're here now, deal with it." Pain. These girls face brutal clients, no protection, and disease that spreads like wildfire. Some turn to sake or opium to numb the horror, but addiction's just another chain. The religious angle's still a head-scratcher. Shinto shrines and Buddhist temples, those pillars of purity, keep their ties to yujo. Some temples run brothels as side hustles, their earnings funding rituals. Sarcasm. Nothing says enlightenment like profiting off human misery while chanting sutras. But as Christianity creeps in via Portuguese traders, attitudes shift. Missionaries rail against prostitution, calling it sin, but samurai just shrug. They're too busy enjoying it. By 1600, Tokugawa Ieyasu's on the horizon, and his Edo period will lock yujo in even tighter cages. Spoiler: Yoshiwara's coming, and it's no picnic. Let's paint another scene. It's 1595, a bustling port in Sakai. A Yujo named Hana, another forgotten name, works a tavern by the docks. She's 17, sold after her village starved in a famine. Her shamisen strings are fraying, like her nerves, as she plays for a crowd of sailors and merchants. A Korean trader offers extra for private time, but Hana is wary. Last month, a friend was beaten for refusing. Her madam watches like a hawk, tallying every coin. Hana's latest poem, Waves crash, my heart sinks, yet I sing of spring. It's a hit, but no one cares about her fever or the rash creeping up her arm. Survival's price, her body, her voice, her soul. Comment challenge. If Hana could escape, where should she go? A temple, a bandit crew, or somewhere else? Share your idea below. As we edge toward the Edo period, the Yujo's world gets bleaker. Tokugawa's about to clamp down, turning pleasure quarters into walled fortresses. Absurdity. Japan's peace means stricter rules for women, not freedom. Yujo like Yuki and Hana are legends in their own time. Courtesans who shape fashion, inspire art, but history buries them. Pain. Their stories are erased unless they're tragic or tied to a famous man. A poem from the time. My name fades like ink and rain, but my tears carve rivers. Survival's a cruel joke. Endure, perform, die young. Sarcasm check. Japan's crafting a unified nation, but unity doesn't include the women fueling its economy. Pleasure quarters are now tourist attractions, with guidebooks listing top courtesans like menu items. Irony. Yujo are celebrities and slaves adored and despised. Disease, debt, and danger define their days, yet they're expected to dazzle. Some rebel, rumors of Yujo joining pirate crews or poisoning abusive clients, but most just survive, one song at a time. Engage. If you could give one Yujo a modern ally, say a doctor or a rebel leader, who would it be? Comment your pick. This is the prelude to Edo's Yoshiwara, where the cage gets shinier but tighter. The Azuchi Momoyama Yujo lived in a world of war and art, their lives a sarcastic footnote to Japan's glory. Stay tuned for part 4, where we'll unravel the final chapter of their story. Hit like if this hooked you, subscribe for the last dive, and comment your location and time. Where are you watching from? What's the most absurd thing you learned today? Spill it below, and let's keep this historical roller coaster rolling. Welcome to Edo, Japan, where the Tokugawa shogunate's all about peace and order, unless you're a Yujo, in which case, good luck. The year's 1603, and Tokugawa Ieyasu's just won the ultimate warlord lottery, establishing a regime that'll last over 2 centuries. But for the women of the pleasure quarters, peace means a fancier cage. Enter Yoshiwara, the walled-off pleasure district in Edo, modern-day Tokyo, built in 1617 after a fire torched the old setup. Picture a fortress of vice, moats, gates, and guards to keep Yujo in and trouble out. Absurdity alert. The shogunate markets Yoshiwara as a cultural gem, a must-visit for samurai and merchants, while the women inside are essentially prisoners. Comment below. Does this state-sponsored entertainment zone sound like progress or just slavery with better branding? Let's meet Rin, another name. History didn't bother to save. She's a top-tier courtesan in Yoshiwara, a Taiyu, the creme de la creme of Yujo. Rin's trained in everything: poetry, shamisen, tea ceremony, even witty banter that could outshine a court scholar. Her kimonos are layered like armor, her hair pinned with combs that cost more than a village's rice crop. Clients, daimyo, rich traders, even the occasional incognito shogun pay a fortune for her time. But here's the sarcastic twist. Rin's a superstar with zero freedom. Her contract's a life sentence, her debt to the brothel owner ballooning with every meal, every silk thread. She's a commodity, paraded in public processions called oiran dochu, where crowds gawk like she's a rare panda. Pain? Rin's 19, but syphilis is already gnawing at her health, her beauty a ticking clock. Survival means charming men who see her as a trophy, not a person. Let's paint a scene. It's 1620, Yoshiwara's lantern-lit streets buzzing with clients. Rin's in a high-end brothel, the greenhouse, where tatami rooms smell of sandalwood and sake. She's performing a dance, her movements precise, her smile a mask. A samurai client, drunk on power and liquor, demands more than her contract allows. Refuse? Risk a beating. Comply? Risk disease or pregnancy. Outside, lower-tier yujo work in cramped stalls, servicing merchants and laborers for pennies. The hierarchy's brutal. Taiyu like Rin are elite, but even their slaves to debt. Lower ranks, Hashi Joro, face worse. Filth, violence, and no hope of climbing the ladder. Absurdity. Yoshiwara is a tourist hotspot, with guidebooks rating courtesans like sushi joints. Comment: if you were Rin, what skill would you lean into to survive? Poetry, dance, or charm? Drop your pick below. The Edo system's a masterclass in irony. The shogunate regulates everything. Yujo must wear specific sashes, live in Yoshiwara, and never leave without permission. Escape attempts? Punished with exile or death. Yet, the same shogunate profits from taxes on brothels, raking in coins while preaching Confucian morality. Women are impure, but their bodies keep the economy humming. Ports like Nagasaki and Osaka thrive on foreign sailors, who bring more syphilis. By 1620, it's a crisis, disfiguring half the Yujo population. No antibiotics, just quack remedies like mercury salves that rot teeth faster than they cure. Pregnancy's a nightmare, abortions are risky, and children born in Yoshiwara are often sold or raised to repeat the cycle. Pain. A Yujo's lifespan averages 25, maybe 30 if she's lucky. Survival's a daily tightrope. Dodge disease, appease clients, and pray your madam doesn't add interest to your debt. Let's talk culture, because Edo's obsessed with it. Yoshiwara inspires ukiyo, a woodblock prints, kabuki plays, and poetry anthologies, but the women behind the art? Erased. A Taiyu like Rin might inspire a masterpiece, but her name's forgotten unless she's tied to a famous man. Take Yugiri, a legendary courtesan whose love affair with a samurai ends in tragedy. Her death immortalized in bunraku puppet plays, but her real story? Lost. Sarcasm. Nothing says cultural icon like being a muse while dying in obscurity. Yujo poetry, often preserved in anthologies like the Kinsei Kogo, drips with pain. My body a lantern, burning bright, snuffed out by dawn. Yet society romanticizes them, ignoring the bruises, the forced smiles, the suicides when hope runs dry. Engage. If you could slip one modern tool into Rin's kimono, a diary, a lawyer, a vaccine, what would it be? Comment your choice. The absurdity deepens with Yoshiwara's rules. Clients must follow etiquette, book through a tea house, pay up front, no violence, but enforcement's a joke. Samurai, above the law, can beat or kill Yujo without consequence. A 1620s record tells of a Yujo murdered by a client. The punishment? A fine, paid to the brothel, not her family. Meanwhile, Yujo are trained to be perfect women, educated, refined, submissive, while their clients face no such standards. Irony. The shogunate bans women from kabuki stages for immorality, but lets Yoshiwara flourish. Comment: does this double standard remind you of anything today? Share your thoughts. Let's zoom to the streets. It's 1630, Yoshiwara's in full swing. A struggling Yujo, let's call her Saki, works in a rundown brothel near the district's edge. She was sold into service after her family lost everything to famine. Her shamasan's out of tune, her kimono patched, but she sings anyway, her voice cracking as she spots a rash on her arm. Syphilis? Smallpox? Or just malnutrition? No doctor to tell. Last week, a friend jumped into the Sumida River, debt and despair too heavy. Saki's contract says 10 years, but she knows she'll die first. Survival's pain, faking joy for men who don't care, praying for a kind client who tips extra. Absurdity. Her brothel's nicknamed Hell's Gate, yet it's a pilgrimage site for Edo's elite. The religious angle's still a head-scratcher. Buddhist temples, now under shogunate control, distance themselves from Yujo, but some still take a cut of brothel profits. Shinto shrines, less squeamish, keep ritual ties. Yujo performs dances for festivals, blurring sacred and profane. Sarcasm. Nothing screams piety like using sex workers to fund your incense budget. Christianity's fading. Tokugawa bans it in 1614, but its brief influence leaves a mark, with missionaries calling Yoshiwara a den of sin. The shogunate's response? Shrug and build bigger walls. Comment challenge. If Saki could rewrite one rule in Yoshiwara, what should it be? Drop your idea below. As Edo solidifies, Yoshiwara becomes a cultural juggernaut. By 1657, it's a city within a city, with 3,000 yujos serving thousands of clients daily. Fashion, slang, even hairstyles start here. Yujo are trendsetters, yet trapped. Some rebel. A 1640s tale speaks of a yujo poisoning a cruel client, another joining a bandit crew, but most just endure, their lives a cycle of debt, disease, and performance. Pain. Every smile hides a scar, every song a scream. A poem from the time. My tears fill the moat, but the gates stay locked. Survival's the cruelest joke. Yujo are Japan's heartbeat, yet history buries them. Sarcasm check. Edo's golden age is built on women's suffering, a floating world that drowns its stars. Yoshiwara's legacy lingers. Later centuries will refine the cage, but the pain stays. These women, from Asobi to Tayu, were artists, survivors, and victims, their lives a sarcastic middle finger to a society that adored their art but not their humanity. Engage. If you could give one yujo a voice to tell her story, what would she say? Comment your version. And that's the end of our journey through medieval Japan's pleasure quarters. From Heian's riverboats to Edo's walled city, yujo lived in a world of absurdity and pain, their resilience a silent roar against history's erasure. Thanks for riding this roller coaster. Hit like if it gripped you, subscribe for more dives into the past, and comment your location and time. Where are you watching from? What's the most gut-punching fact you learned? Spill it below, and let's keep this time travel tribe alive. Hey guys, imagine this. You're 9 months pregnant, trapped on a creaking wooden ship tossing like a cork in a storm. No hospital, no epidural, just a bunch of bewildered sailors staring at you while the ocean roars. Welcome to the nightmare of giving birth at sea, where survival wasn't just about the baby, but about not getting tossed overboard by fate's cruel joke. Before you get comfortable, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. Ah, the age of sail, those glorious days from the 15th to the 19th century, when humans decided that conquering the oceans was a brilliant idea, forgetting that Mother Nature had a wicked sense of humor and zero sympathy for the human condition. Picture it, massive wooden beasts slicing through waves, powered by wind and the sweat of men who smelled like salt, rum, and regret. But amid the tales of explorers like Columbus or captains chasing whales, there's a forgotten horror story, the women who dared to be pregnant on these floating death traps. We're talking long voyages, months, sometimes years, crossing Atlantic storms, Pacific calms that drove you mad, or Arctic chills that froze your bones. And childbirth? Oh, it didn't politely wait for landfall. No, it crashed the party like an uninvited kraken, turning the deck into a scene of absurd chaos and raw survival pain. Irony alert, while men dreamed of glory and gold, women were literally birthing the next generation in conditions that make modern camping look like a spa retreat. Let's start at the beginning, because history loves to build its absurdities layer by layer. Rewind to the Viking era, those hardy Norsemen sailing from Scandinavia to Iceland or even North America around the 10th century. Women weren't just passengers, they were settlers, packing up families for voyages that could last weeks in open longships. Historical sagas whisper of births at sea. Imagine Leif Erikson's mom, Theodode, or some unnamed Viking wife, squatting on a pitching deck amid oarsmen chanting war songs. No privacy, no midwives unless a fellow woman stepped up. The absurdity? These ships were basically oversized rowboats with sails, exposed to rain, wind, and waves that could swamp you. Survival pain, labor in freezing spray, baby emerging blue from cold, wrapped in whatever wool wasn't soaked. One saga mentions a woman giving birth during a storm, the child named after the gale. Talk about branding your kid with trauma. But hey, Vikings were tough. If the baby survived the first wave, it was deemed worthy. Comment below. Would you name your seaborn kid Stormbringer or something tamer? Let's hear your ideas. Fast forward to the age of exploration, the 15th and 16th centuries, when Europeans got itchy feet or sails and decided to discover places already inhabited. Columbus's Voyages? Mostly men, but later expeditions dragged women along as colonists' wives or grimly enslaved indigenous women. On Magellan's circumnavigation from 1519 to 1522, no official records of births, but mutinies and scurvy were the stars. Imagine a pregnant woman amid that mess, her belly swelling as rations dwindled. The pain. Ships like the Victoria were cramped coffins 85 feet long for 45 men. No room for a birthing suite. If labor hit, it was the surgeon's job. Barber surgeons, mind you, experts in amputations and bloodletting, not obstetrics. Absurdity. These medical men believed in humors and astrology, so they'd check the stars before checking the cervix. Survival meant praying the ship didn't hit a reef mid-contraction, or that infection didn't set in from unclean hands. One account from a Portuguese voyage mentions a woman birthing twins in the hold, the baby surviving only because crew shared their meager water. Ironic, isn't it? Conquering the world while a woman conquers childbirth in the dark belly of a ship. But let's amp up the sarcasm with the Mayflower in 1620, that iconic pilgrim voyage from England to Plymouth, a 66-day Atlantic nightmare. 3 women were pregnant among the 102 passengers: Elizabeth Hopkins, Susanna White, and Mary Norris. Elizabeth gave birth to a boy named Oceanus. Yes, really, because nothing says welcome to life like naming your kid after the hellish expanse that nearly killed you both. The ship was a floating sardine can, 100 feet long, packed with families, livestock, and seasick Puritans. No dedicated midwife. Women helped each other, drawing on folk knowledge of herbs and prayers. The absurdity. These God-fearing folks believed childbirth pain was Eve's curse, so no complaining, just grit your teeth as waves slam the hull, mimicking contractions. Survival pain. Rough seas meant no standing, so labor on a swaying bunk, blood and fluids mixing with bilge water. Oceanus survived the voyage but died young. Peregrine White, born after anchoring, fared better. Imagine the scene. Susanna in labor, ship creaking like a dying whale. Men topside battling storms. Women below whispering encouragement. Historical joke. The Mayflower Compact was signed while women pushed out the future of America. Talk about multitasking. What do you think? Could you handle birthing a baby named after an ocean that tried to drown you? Drop a comment with your sea-inspired baby name ideas. I bet they'll be hilarious. Venturing into the 17th and 18th centuries, as colonial trade boomed, women on ships became more common. Wives of officers, merchants' families, or tragically enslaved women on slave ships. The Middle Passage was a horror beyond sarcasm. African women, pregnant or impregnated by crew, giving birth in chains below deck. Accounts from Olaudah Equiano's narrative hint at the agony. Women laboring in filth, babies born into slavery or tossed overboard if deemed unviable. Absurdity. Captains viewed births as cargo increase, logging them like barrels of rum. Survival pain. No hygiene, malnutrition weakening mothers, infections rampant in the stifling heat. One record from the 1780s describes a woman birthing during a storm, the child surviving only to face a life of bondage. Ironic cruelty. While Enlightenment thinkers pondered liberty, women birthed in literal darkness. On merchant and naval ships, things weren't much rosier. British Royal Navy in the Age of Sail discouraged women, but they snuck aboard disguised or as wives tolerated on long voyages. Hannah Snell, a famous cross-dresser, fought as a Marine, but pregnant women? Rare, but when it happened, chaos. A 1740 account from HMS Swallow mentions a sailor's wife giving birth mid-battle, cannon fire drowning her screams, the baby wrapped in sailcloth. The surgeon, if sober, might assist with forceps forged for amputations. Absurdity. Naval regulations banned women, yet captains turned blind eyes for morale, until a baby cried. Survival. Rough handling by male midwives, postpartum in hammocks swinging like pendulums. Let's sarcasm this up with convict ships to Australia, starting in 1787 with the First Fleet. Women prisoners, many pregnant from jail or voyage assaults, birthed en route. The Lady Juliana in 1789 to 1790 was a floating brothel-turned-nursery. Over 200 women, dozens pregnant, giving birth in the 6-month sail. Surgeon John White recorded births with clinical detachment, but imagine the pain. Chained below, rats nibbling toes, scurvy rotting gums as contractions hit. One woman, Mary Wickham, birthed a girl named Charlotte after the ship. The baby survived, but many didn't. Absurdity. The British Empire civilizing Australia by shipping pregnant convicts, treating births as logistical annoyances. Comment time. If you were a convict mom on that ship, what would you name your sea-born kid despite the system? Share below. Diving deeper into the 18th century whaling voyages, those epic New England hunts lasting 3 to 5 years. Wives joined captains, turning ships into hen frigates. Mary Brewster on the Tiger in 1845 birthed at sea, her diary dripping irony. What a place to bring a child into the world. Cramped cabins, no privacy, crew peeking curiously. Absurdity. While men harpooned whales, women harpooned survival, using whalebone for cradles. Pain, labor amid oil smells, ship rolling in Pacific swells, husband assisting with whaling tools as forceps. Some births in Hawaiian ports, but at sea, pure grit. A 1790 log mentions a wife birthing twins during a gale, one surviving, named Gale. History's bad pun. As we sail into the 19th century, immigrant voyages explode. Irish famine ships in the 1840s packed like cattle. The Garrick in 1847 saw 33 births in 40 days, babies named after the ship or ocean. Conditions, steerage hell, vomit and diarrhea everywhere. Women laboring on straw pallets. Absurdity. Ads promised comfortable passage, but reality was birthing amid cholera outbreaks. Survival pain, no doctors for poor folk. Fellow passengers midwifed, using whiskey for pain. One mother, Bridget Kearney, birthed mid-storm, baby gift, a sarcastic nod to fate. Engage. Imagine you're on that famine ship. What's one thing you'd pack for a sea birth? Comment your survival hack. This is just the stormy start, folks. The absurdity and pain only ramp up as we hit peak whaling and transatlantic madness. Stay tuned for part 2, where we delve into whaling wives' diaries and the gruesome details of at-sea deliveries. Smash like if this hooked you, subscribe for more historical horrors, and comment your location and time. What shocked you most so far? Tell me below. Welcome back to the high seas, where the age of sail keeps serving up absurdity like a bad tavern stew. It's the 17th to 19th centuries, and ships are bigger, voyages longer, but the conditions for pregnant women? Still a floating horror show. We're talking whaling expeditions lasting years, transatlantic immigrant ships packed with desperate souls, and naval fleets where women sneaked aboard only to face labor amid cannon fire. The irony? While men wrote epic logs about conquering oceans, women were conquering childbirth in conditions that make a modern dentist visit look like a luxury cruise. Comment below. What's the worst place you can imagine giving birth today? Let's see if it beats a ship's hold in a storm. Let's meet Sarah, a whaling captain's wife in the 1820s New England, aboard a Nantucket ship chasing sperm whales across the Pacific. These hen frigates were family affairs. Wives joined for voyages that could stretch 3 to 5 years. Sarah's pregnant, her cabin a 6 by 8 foot box reeking of whale oil and salt pork. No hospital, no midwife, just her husband, Captain John, who's better at harpooning than delivering babies. The absurdity, Sarah's expected to keep the ship's morale high, mend sails, and now push out a kid while the ship pitches in a squall. Survival pain, labor on a bunk swaying like a drunk pendulum. No anesthesia, except maybe a swig of rum if the crew's feeling generous. Mary Brewster's 1845 diary from the Tiger describes this hell. No woman should endure such a place for birth, yet here I am, praying the child lives. Sarah's baby, let's call him Jonah. Ironic, right? Arrives during a calm, wrapped in sailcloth, cradled in a whalebone box. Half the crew thinks it's bad luck. The other half demands a naming party. Comment, what sea-inspired name would you give Sarah's kid? Something luckier than Jonah. Zooming out, whaling ships were floating villages, but not the cozy kind. By the 1820s, dozens of women sailed with husbands, especially on American whalers. Diaries from the era, Mary Chipman on the Charles W. Morgan, Eliza Brock on the Lexington, paint a grim picture. Births happened in captains' cabins or below deck, with crew wives or illiterate stewards as midwives. Absurdity, These women used whalebone forceps or fishing line for umbilical cords, while men topside wrestled blubber. Pain. Infections were rampant. Think puerperal fever from unwashed hands killing mothers days after birth. One log from 1830s Nantucket mentions a wife dying post-delivery, her baby surviving only because a Hawaiian port nurse stepped in during a stopover. The irony? Whaling was America's oil boom, but women paid the price in blood and sweat, their stories buried in ship logs no one read. Now, let's sail to the transatlantic immigrant ships of the 1840s, especially the Irish famine fleets. The Great Famine drove millions to America, and coffin ships like the Jeannie Johnston or the Dunbrody carried pregnant women in steerage. Think dark, damp holds where 200 people shared one latrine. Conditions? A nightmare of vomit, lice, and cholera. A 1847 report from the Garrick notes 33 births in 40 days, with babies named Atlantic or Hope. Sarcastic optimism at its finest. Survival pain, labor on straw pallets surrounded by moaning sick. No privacy, just a tattered curtain if lucky. Women like Bridget O'Connor, a 20-year-old from Cork, birthed amid screams of dying passengers, her baby surviving only because a fellow emigrant shared her last bread crust. Absurdity. Ship manifests listed babies as additional passengers, like they were luggage. No doctors for steerage, surgeons stayed topside with first class. Folk remedies, herbs, prayers, or a lucky charm were all women had. Comment. If you were Bridget, what one item would you cling to during labor? A rosary, a shawl, or something else? Share below. Let's crank the irony with naval ships. The British Royal Navy in the 18th century banned women, but they boarded anyway. Wives, mistresses, or cross-dressers like Hannah Snell. When pregnancy happened, it was chaos. A 1750 log from HMS Victory mentions a sailor's wife birthing during a French skirmish, cannonballs flying as she pushed. The surgeon, likely drunk, used amputation tools to cut the cord. Pain, labor amid gunpowder smoke, blood pooling on oak planks. Absurdity, naval discipline demanded silence, but try telling that to a woman in labor. Some captains tolerated babies, naming them after the ship. HMS Surprise, anyone? But others saw them as bad omens, pressuring mothers to deal with it at port. Survival meant hiding pregnancy until the last second, then enduring crew gossip and captain's wrath. A rare account from 1790's HMS Bounty, yes, that Bounty, hints at a Polynesian woman birthing en route, her child raised on deck amid mutiny talks. Wild, right? Sarcasm time. Nothing says naval glory like forcing a woman to birth in a gun deck while you chase French frigates. Comment. Would you sneak aboard as a Navy wife or stay on land? Let's hear your choice. Diving into convict ships to Australia, the pain gets grimmer. The Second Fleet in 1790 was a death trap, 30% mortality with pregnant women hit hardest. The Surprise carried 42 women, many pregnant from prison assaults or crew favors. Births happened in chains below deck, where air was thick with disease. A record from the Neptune notes a baby born mid-voyage, mother dying of fever days later. Absurdity. The British Empire called this colonization, but it was a floating prison where babies were born into servitude. Survival. Mothers begged for extra rations, trading dignity for milk. Some babies, like Anne Green's on the Lady Juliana, survived to become settlers, but most faced short, brutal lives. Irony. Ships were named Hope or Friendship, yet delivered despair. Let's paint a scene. It's 1840 aboard a whaler off Japan. Sarah's in labor, her cabin a sauna of oil fumes and heat. The ship rolls in a Pacific gale, lanterns swinging, casting shadows like a horror play. Her husband's at the helm, so a steward's wife, Jane, steps up, armed with a knife and prayers. Sarah grips a rope, biting a rag to muffle screams. The baby, a girl, named Pacifica, arrives blue but breathing, wrapped in a torn shirt. Crew mutter about omens, but Jane snaps. She's tougher than you lot. Pain. Sarah's bleeding, no clean water, infection looming. Absurdity. The ship's log records the birth in one line, next to 2 whales sighted. Survival. Sarah nurses Pacifica, whispering tales of land to keep hope alive. Engage. If you were Jane, what advice would you give Sarah to survive postpartum at sea? Drop it in the comments. the cultural angle's a bitter pill. Ships, logs, and diaries romanticize exploration, but women's stories, footnotes at best. Wailing wives like Eliza Williams wrote of births with stoic brevity. Childborn, stormy night, all well. But well meant surviving sepsis, starvation, or storms. Immigrant women's tales, preserved in oral histories, speak of communal strength, women sharing rags, songs, or superstitions to ease labor. Absurdity, sailors feared women's bad luck, but relied on their resilience. Pain, postpartum meant no rest, just rocking a baby while seasickness churned your guts. As we edge toward the 19th century's peak, steamships loom, promising faster voyages but not better conditions. Immigrant ships get deadlier with overcrowding. Whalers push farther into Arctic waters, where cold kills newborns. Irony, technology advances, but women's survival hangs on luck and grit. A 1850s account from a California gold rush ship describes a Chinese woman birthing in steerage, her baby named Golden, hopeful, but the mother died of fever. Survival's price, endurance beyond reason. Comment challenge: if you could send one modern item to a sea birthing mom, a blanket, medicine, or something else, what would it be? Share below. This is just the midpoint of our stormy saga. Part 3 dives into steamship horrors and the rare triumphs of women who birthed at sea. Hit like if this gripped you, subscribe for more historical dives, and comment your location and time. Where are you watching from? What's the wildest fact you learned today? Spill it below, and let's keep this time travel party afloat. Here we are, in the 19th century's maritime madness, where sail meets steam, but the horrors of childbirth at sea don't get a technology upgrade. The world's buzzing with empire building, gold rushes, and mass migrations, but for pregnant women on ships, it's still a floating gauntlet of disease, storms, and men who think a baby's cry is worse luck than a cracked mast. Irony alert: while steamships promise faster voyages, they're just as likely to be floating petri dishes, and women in labor are still rolling the dice with no hospital in sight. Picture a world where adventure means birthing a child in a damp hold, while the crew argues over rations. Comment below. What's the worst modern travel nightmare you've faced? Does it even compare to this? Let's meet Ellen, a 25-year-old Irish immigrant on a famine ship bound for New York in 1848. The Great Famines pushed her family onto a coffin ship. Let's call it the Star of Hope, because history loves a sarcastic name. Ellen's pregnant, fleeing starvation, but the ship's steerage is a hellhole. 300 souls crammed in a space meant for 100, air thick with cholera and despair. Labor hits mid-Atlantic. No doctor, just a fellow passenger, Mary, who's delivered her own 5 kids in a Dublin slum. The absurdity: Ellen's birthing on a plank bed, waves slamming the hull like a giant's fist, while rats scurry over her feet. Survival pain, no clean water, just a bucket of brackish sludge. No pain relief except Mary's whispered prayers. The baby, named Aaron for the homeland, arrives screaming, wrapped in a shawl torn from Ellen's dress. Half the passengers cheer, the other half grumble about another mouth to feed. Ellen's feverish post-birth, infection creeping in, no antibiotics, just hope. A ship's log notes Aaron's birth like it's cargo. Female infant steerage, October 12th. Comment: what name would you give a famine ship baby to honor survival? Drop it below. Zooming out, the 1840s and 1850s are the peak of transatlantic migration. Irish, German, and Scandinavian families flood to America, and ships like the Washington or the Isaac Webb carry thousands, with dozens of births per voyage. Conditions? Imagine a modern subway car, but wet, diseased, and rocking for 6 weeks. Steerage passengers, mostly poor, get no medical care. Surgeons cater to cabin-class elites. Women in labor rely on each other, sharing folk remedies: boiled seaweed for strength, whiskey for pain, or a charm to ward off evil spirits. Absurdity: shipping companies advertise safe passage, but typhus and dysentery kill 10 to 20% of passengers, mothers and newborns included. Pain: postpartum women nurse in filth, their milk drying up from malnutrition. A 1851 report from the Jeannie Johnston, a rare lucky ship, notes 17 births, all surviving. Mothers like Catherine Kelly credited communal support, singing hymns to drown out screams. Irony: while newspapers hailed America's land of opportunity, Women birthed in conditions worse than the slums they fled. Let's sail to the whaling grounds, where hen frigates keep braving the Pacific and Arctic. By the 1850s, whaling's a global industry, and wives like Lydia Swain on the Columbus sail for years, chasing sperm whales to Japan or Alaska. Lydia's pregnant, her cabin a shrine to whale oil and salt stains. Labor hits off the Aleutians, the ship encased in a fog, crew harpooning nearby. No midwife, just a steward's wife, Hannah, who's seen one birth and thinks she's an expert. The absurdity. Lydia births on a bunk using a whalebone comb to bite down, while the ship rolls in icy swells. Pain. No sterile tools, just a knife boiled in rum. Postpartum bleeding's a gamble with no doctor for 1,000 miles. The baby, named Arctic, survives, cradled in a cask lined with sealskin. Hannah's diary, real women like her wrote them, notes, child born in frost, mother weak, but God's mercy holds. Sarcasm. Nothing says family vacation like birthing in sub-zero temperatures while your husband hunts blubber. Comment. If you were Lydia, what whaling keepsake would you use for a crib? Bone, sail, or something else? Share below. Now, let's hit the convict ships to Australia, where the British Empire is still dumping its undesirables. The 1830s to 1850s see ships like the Diamond or the Garland, carrying women prisoners, many pregnant from jail assaults or crew entanglements. Conditions are medieval, chained in holds, air foul with vomit and worse. A 1840s log from the Raja notes a woman, Anne Doyle, birthing twins mid-voyage, one dying from malnutrition. The surgeon, barely trained, uses laudanum to quiet her screams. Great for opium dreams, useless for infection. Absurdity. These births are logged as colonial assets, like livestock. Pain. Mothers face scurvy, their teeth falling out as they nurse. Babies die from diarrhea or are sold at port. Some, like Mary Wade's son on the Lady Juliana, survive to become settlers, but most face grim futures. Irony. Britain's civilizing mission starts with women birthing in chains. Comment. If you were Anne, what would you whisper to your twins to keep their spirits alive? Drop it in the comments. Let's paint a scene. It's 1852 aboard a California gold rush ship, the Seabird, bound for San Francisco. May, a Chinese immigrant, is in labor below deck, her family fleeing poverty for gold dreams. The steerage is a sauna of sweat and seasickness, passengers packed like sardines. May's husband is topside, gambling for extra rations. A Scottish woman, Agnes, steps up, her only credential a sister who birthed back home. May grips a bamboo charm, screaming as the ship lurches in a Pacific storm. The baby, named Jin, Gold, arrives, weak but alive, wrapped in a rice sack. Agnes hums a lullaby, mixing Gaelic with May's Cantonese prayers. Pain. May's bleeding heavily, no clean bandages, just torn cloth. Absurdity. The ship's captain toasts the birth with rum, while May fights fever in the dark. Survival May nurses, Jin whispering of mountains she'll never see. A log entry, Chinese female, male infant, no complications. Liar, engage. If you were Agnes, what song would you sing to calm May? Share your pick below. The cultural lens is a bitter one. Ship logs and diaries, male authored, reduce births to footnotes. Woman delivered, child alive. Women's stories, preserved in oral histories or rare journals, reveal resilience. On immigrant ships, women formed birth circles, sharing rags, prayers, or superstitions, like tying a knot in a rope to ease labor. Whaling wives traded tips, whale oil for chapped skin, salt pork broth for strength. Absurdity. Sailors feared women's curse but begged for their cooking or sewing. Pain. Postpartum meant no recovery, just rocking a baby while dodging leaks or ice. A 1850s gold rush account mentions a woman birthing twins, one named Aurora for the ship's destination. Hopeful, but both died of fever. Steamships emerging in the 1830s promise speed but deliver overcrowding. The SS Great Britain in 1845 carried 200 emigrants, with births and steerage amid coal dust and engine noise. Surgeons, now slightly better trained, still prioritized first class. A record notes a mother dying of sepsis, her baby adopted by strangers. Irony. Steam's progress didn't save women from medieval risks. Comment. If you could send one modern medical tool to May or Ellen, bandages, penicillin, or something else, what would it be? Drop it below. Sarcasm check. The 19th century's globalized world relies on women's grit, but history buries their stories under tales of male conquest. From famine ships to whalers, these mothers birthed in defiance of death, their babies named for hope they barely felt. Stay tuned for part 4, where we wrap this saga with steamship peaks in the fading age of sail. Hit like if this gripped you, subscribe for the final dive, and comment your location and time. Where are you watching from? What's the most shocking fact you learned today? Spill it below, and let's keep this sea-soaked journey rolling. Here we are, in the mid-19th century, where steamships are puffing their way across oceans, promising a brave new world of speed and comfort. Spoiler, for pregnant women, it's still a floating nightmare, just with more coal dust. The age of sail is fading, but the seas are busier than ever. Gold rush ships to California, emigrant fleets to Australia, and Arctic expeditions chasing glory. Childbirth at sea, still a gamble where the stakes are life, death, or a baby named after the ship that nearly killed you both. Irony alert, while men dreamed of gold and empire, women were birthing the future in conditions that make a modern road trip look like a 5-star resort. Comment below, what's the worst travel story you've got? Does it beat labor in a coal-powered steerage hold? Let's meet Fiona, a Scottish emigrant on the SS Great Eastern in 1859. Bound for New York with dreams of a better life. She's 8 months pregnant, crammed in steerage with 400 others, the air thick with soot and sickness. Steamships are faster, 2 weeks versus 6, but the holds are just as grim. Damp, dark, and crawling with lice. Labor hits during a North Atlantic gale, the ship's engines groaning like a dying beast. No doctor for steerage. Fiona's got Maggie, a fellow passenger who's birthed 3 kids in Glasgow tenements. The absurdity. Fiona's laboring on a straw mat, the ship's vibrations rattling her bones while first-class passengers sip tea topside. Survival pain, no sterile tools, just a rusty knife for the cord. No pain relief except Maggie's Gaelic curses to distract her. The baby, named Isla after the hoped-for American dream, arrives gasping, wrapped in a shawl soaked with bilge water. The crew's log barely notes it. Female steerage, born 14th. Fiona's fever spikes post-birth, puerperal sepsis, the silent killer. But she clings to life, whispering lullabies to Isla. Comment, what name would you give a steamship-born baby to defy the odds? Drop it below. Zooming out, the 1850s and 1860s are a frenzy of migration. The California Gold Rush pulls thousands across the Pacific or around Cape Horn, with ships like the Flying Cloud carrying families, including pregnant women. Conditions? Steerage is a sardine tin of disease. Cholera, typhus, and smallpox thrive in the damp. A 1853 log from the Sea Serpent records 5 births, 3 babies dying within days from malnutrition or fever. Women like Mei Ling, a Chinese immigrant, birth in holds reeking of opium and fish, relying on fellow passengers for help. Mei Ling's baby, named Fortune, sarcastic given the odds, survives, but she doesn't, felled by infection. Absurdity. Shipping companies boast modern amenities, yet steerage mothers deliver amid rats and rot. Pain. Postpartum means no rest, just nursing while dodging leaks and sick neighbors. Irony. The gold rush promises wealth, but women pay with their lives, their births logged like cargo tallies. Let sail to Australia's emigrant and convict ships, still running strong. The 1850s see vessels like the Marco Polo carrying free settlers alongside convicts. Pregnant women, often wives of settlers or ex-convicts, face brutal voyages. A 1852 record from the Ticonderoga, dubbed a plague ship, notes 12 births, half the babies dying from scurvy or diarrhea. Mary Kelly, a settler's wife, births a boy named Marco after the ship, laboring in a hold where 100 passengers died of typhus. The surgeon, overworked, offers laudanum and a prayer. Absurdity. The ship's called a floating palace, but it's a death trap, with mothers using torn petticoats for swaddling. Pain. Mary's malnourished, her milk thin, yet she sings to Marco, promising a land she might not see. Survival, communal support, women sharing rags, broth, or charms like a knotted cord for luck. Comment, if you were Mary, what would you sing to keep Marco calm during a storm? Share your song choice below. Now, let's hit the Arctic, where exploration ships like the HMS Erebus and Terror in the 1840s hunt the Northwest Passage. Women are rare, but some, wives of officers or Inuit partners, join the frigid voyages. Imagine Jane, an officer's wife on a whaler-turned-explorer in 1855, pregnant in the Arctic's endless night. Labor hits in a cabin coated with frost, the ship locked in ice. No midwife, just a cook who's seen a cow birth. The absurdity, Jane's birthing while polar winds howl, her screams drowned by creaking ice. Pain, no heat except a whale oil lamp, blood freezing on the floorboards. The baby, named Aurora for the northern lights, survives, wrapped in sealskin. A log entry, child born, mother weak, icebound. Irony, explorers seek glory, but Jane's triumph, birthing in sub-zero hell, gets no medals. Sarcasm, nothing says heroic like ignoring a mother's ordeal while mapping a frozen nowhere. Let's paint a scene. It's 1860 aboard the SS City of Boston, a transatlantic steamer. Anna, a Polish emigrant, is in labor in steerage, surrounded by 200 passengers coughing and praying. The ship's pitching in a storm, coal engines rumbling like thunder. Anna's helped by Sophia, a grandmother who's birthed 8 kids in Warsaw. No clean water, just a bucket, no tools, just a spoon to cut the cord. Anna grips a rosary, her screams blending with the ship's whistle. The baby, named Stefan for hope, arrives blue but breathing, swaddled in a flour sack. Sophia hums a Polish lullaby, calming Anna as fever sets in. Absurdity. The ship's brochure promised comfort, but Anna's fighting sepsis in a rat-infested hold. Pain. Postpartum means nursing amid coal dust, praying Stefan survives the voyage. The log. Male infant, steerage, no issues. Liar. Engage. If you were Sophia, what advice would you give Anna to survive postpartum at sea? Drop it in the comments. The cultural angle's a bitter pill. Women's stories, preserved in diaries, letters, or oral tales, show resilience. On emigrant ships, women formed sisterhoods, sharing herbs like chamomile or superstitions like spitting on a coin for luck. Wailing wives like Susan Veeder on the Nauticon wrote of births with grim humor. Baby born in gale hope he likes whales. Arctic women used Inuit tricks, sealskin for warmth, fat for nourishment. Absurdity. Sailors feared women's bad luck, but relied on their strength to keep crews fed or sane. Pain. Postpartum meant no recovery, just rocking a baby while dodging ice or cholera. A 1860s account from the SS Persia mentions a mother birthing twins, naming them Ocean and Star. Both died, her diary noting, "My heart sank with them." Steamships, now dominant, cut voyage times but amplify overcrowding. The SS Great Western in 1856 carried 1,000 passengers, with berths in steerage amid engine noise and filth. Surgeons, slightly better trained, still prioritized elites. A record notes a mother dying of hemorrhage, her baby adopted by a stranger. Irony. Steam's modernity didn't save women from ancient risks, sepsis, starvation, despair. Comment, if you could send one modern item to Anna or Fiona, a blanket, antiseptic, or something else, what would it be? Share below. Sarcasm check. The 19th century's connected world was built on women's suffering, their births a footnote to male adventures. From gold rush dreams to Arctic quests, these mothers defied death, naming babies for hope they barely felt. Oceanus, Fortune, Aurora. Their stories, buried in logs or whispered in lullabies, scream resilience against a world that didn't care. This wraps our journey through the stormy seas of childbirth. From Viking waves to steamship holds, women birthed in defiance of absurdity and pain, their babies carrying names like badges of survival. Thanks for sailing with me. Hit like if this gripped you, subscribe for more historical dives, and comment your location and time. Where are you watching from? What's the most gut-punching fact you learned? Spill it below, and let's keep this time travel tribe alive. Hey guys, imagine this. In the frozen hellscape of Siberia, a woman squats in a flimsy reindeer skin tent, winds howling like vengeful spirits, enduring labor pains that could shatter ice, with no epidural, no doctor, just an elder muttering prayers. To gods who might or might not be listening, welcome to the absurd, agonizing world of childbirth in Siberian tribes, where survival was a cruel game and babies entered the world wrapped in moss and mystery. Before you get comfortable, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. Siberia, that vast, unforgiving freezer of a land where temperatures plunge to -50°C, and humans have clung to life for millennia, like stubborn icicles on a yak's beard. We're talking indigenous tribes, the Nenets, Evenki, Khanty, Yakut, Chukchi, and their kin, nomadic herders and hunters who roam the tundra and taiga, chasing reindeer and dodging frostbite. These folks weren't just surviving, they were thriving in a world that would make your average modern camper cry for mommy. But childbirth? Oh, that's where history serves up its most sarcastic punchlines. No cozy hospitals, no beeping monitors, just raw, primal rituals laced with superstition, pain that tested the soul, and absurd customs that make you wonder if the gods were having a laugh. It's a story of women who birthed in blizzards, confessed sins to ease contractions, and turned moss into diapers, all while society patted them on the back for keeping the tribe going. Survival's pain wrapped in fur and folklore, ironic, because while men hunted glory, women hunted ways to not die pushing out the next generation. Let's kick off with the Nenets, those hardy reindeer nomads of the Yamal Peninsula, where the Arctic wind slaps you harder than a scorned lover. Picture a Nenets woman, let's call her Yara, in the dead of winter, her belly swollen like a overfed seal, trudging through snowdrifts on a migration that never ends. Pregnancy wasn't a time for Netflix and cravings. It was a gauntlet of taboos designed to keep evil spirits at bay. Yara couldn't eat certain foods. Raw meat was out, lest the baby come out wild like a wolf pup. She had to avoid tying knots because, absurdity alert, that might tie up the birth canal. And if she stared at a deformed animal, bam, her kid might inherit the flaw. These weren't suggestions. They were survival hacks in a world where one wrong move could summon John Nebia, the Earth Mother, in a bad mood. The irony? In a land where starvation lurked like a shadow, pregnant women got the best scraps, first dibs on reindeer liver for that vitamin boost, but only if they confessed every little sin to keep the spirits happy. Painful, you bet. Imagine whispering your secrets to a shaman while your back aches from hauling sleds, knowing one unconfessed fling could mean a breech baby. As labor crept in, Yara's world shrank to the chum. The conical tent that's basically a glorified teepee made of reindeer hides, drafty as a politician's promise. No epidural here. Pain was part of the deal, a test of endurance that separated the tough from the tundra fodder. Nenets women birthed on their knees, facing the tent wall at first, symbolizing turning away from the world, then spinning to face the sacred fire as the baby crowned, because fire meant life, warmth, and maybe a quick boil of chaga tea for strength. The absurdity ramps up. If labor dragged on, hubby had to confess infidelities by tying knots on a belt. Oh, that time with the neighbor's wife? Not one. The shaman's daughter? Not two. Each confession supposedly untangled the cosmic mess holding up the birth. Sarcasm dripping. Nothing says romantic partnership like airing dirty laundry mid-contraction, while Yara grits her teeth, forbidden to scream lest she scare off the good spirits. Survival's pain? Hours, sometimes days, in sub-zero temps, with the tent's thin walls letting in blasts of wind that could freeze sweat on your brow. If things went south, breach, hemorrhage, the Shu Nebia, the mother of the umbilical cord, stepped in. This elder woman, post-menopausal and pure, was the midwife equivalent, armed with herbs, chants, and a knife sharpened on reindeer bone. Commented time. If you were Yara, what taboo would you break first, eating raw meat or tying a knot just for spite? Drop your rebellious choice below. I bet it'll spark some laughs. The baby slides out, let's say a boy, named after a grandfather's spirit to recycle souls like eco-warriors, and the real absurdity begins. The placenta? Buried under the fire pit or hung in a tree, a gift back to nature, because everything borrowed must return. The umbilical cord, tied with reindeer sinew, then the stump powdered with ground sphagnum moss. Nature's diaper genie, absorbent as a sponge and antibacterial, courtesy of flavonoids that fight off tundra bugs. Ironic, isn't it? In a world without Pampers, moss was the MVP, collected in summer by women and kids, dried like laundry, and stuffed into bags for winter births. But the pain lingers. Yara's expected to walk soon after, thrombosis be damned. Turns out this tough love prevented blood clots, an accidental medical win in an era without doctors. Postpartum, she's isolated briefly to cleanse with smoke from ledum bushes, warding off evil while nursing in a cradle of birch and reindeer hair. The community chips in, elders bless, family shares meat, but survival's edge is sharp. High infant mortality from cold, infection, or wolves meant every birth was a gamble. Shifting gears to the Evenki, or even those forest-dwelling cousins in Yakutia, where taiga trees whisper secrets and shamans drum up storms. For an even woman like Lena, pregnancy was a spiritual minefield. The creator god Havki, imagined as a grumpy old man, doled out babies like favors, so Lena followed a code of prohibitions. No heavy lifting, in nomad life. No certain berries lest the kid turn out sour. Absurdity peaks with food taboos. Break. 1. And your child's wits dull like a blunt knife. Preparation involved rituals like feeding the life spirit in Muhan, branding a sacred reindeer Kujai for luck. Painful survival. Lena's body, already battered by endless treks, now carried extra weight, with no prenatal vitamins. Just faith in Ajihit, the childbearing goddess, who needed appeasing with offerings. When contractions hit, Lena's tent became a sacred arena. Birth was solo-ish, with family nearby but spirits in charge. The placenta went into a Galomo pole, a wooden structure like a cosmic mailbox, returning essence to the heavens. Ironic twist, this return to nature philosophy sounds eco-friendly, but in blizzards digging a hole for burial meant frostbitten fingers. Shamans played backup, chanting to banish bad juju, their drums echoing like thunder. If labor stalled, more confessions, adultery, lies, untied metaphysical knots. Sarcasm, because nothing eases agony like family therapy during delivery. Post-birth, cleansing smoke from ledum, seeing off Ajihit with prayers, and the baby swaddled in furs, named for strength against the wild. What shocks you more, the moss diapers or confession knots? Comment your take. Let's debate the wildest ritual. Deeper into Khanty territory, those river dwellers of the Ob Basin, where swamps and forests hide ancient gods. For a Khanty woman like Mira, childbirth invoked Kaltash, the goddess of labor with sacrifices, maybe a reindeer's blood, to beg for ease. Beliefs in soul transmigration meant fortune-telling post-birth, whose ancestor spirit inhabited the kid. Taboos galore. Avoid certain paths to dodge evil spirits. No mixing foods that clash cosmically. Survival pain. Mira birthed in a chum or yurt, assisted by elder women, but shamans intervened if spirits meddled. Trances induced by fly agaric mushrooms, risking their own lives for the tribes. Absurd. Soviet repression later torched sacred sites, arresting shamans, forcing births in sterile clinics while traditions whispered underground. Ironic as empires civilized them, stripping the very rituals that sustained survival. Let's paint a scene. It's 1800s. Yamal, Yara's chum, glows faintly from the fire. Winds scream outside, reindeer snort in the herd, contractions grip like bear claws. Yara kneels, gripping a pole, Shunebya chanting to Tuhada, fire protector. Hubby outside, tying confession knots. That one time, each knot a prayer for progress. The baby crowns, Yara turns to the fire, pushes with a grunt, no screams allowed. Out comes the child, slimy and wailing, cord cut with a sacred knife, stump moss dusted, placenta buried, smoke wafts for cleanse. Pain throbs, but Yara stands, nurses ready for tomorrow's migration. Survival's cruel joke, joy in a bundle, terror in the tundra. Engage, imagine you're the Shunebja. What herb or chant would you use to ease Yara's pain? Comment your shaman tip. As Soviet shadows loomed, traditions bent but didn't break. Khanty shamans exiled, even rituals forgotten in maternity wards. Absurd progress, trading spirits for scalpels. Yet, pain persisted. Forced settlements wrecked pastures, boarding schools stole kids, disrupting the birth knowledge chain. Ironic, modern life brought hunger, cold, while old ways offered resilience. This is just the icy tip, folks. Part 2 thaws more tribes, deeper rituals, Soviet absurdities. Smash like if hooked. Subscribe for the chill. Comment location and time. What pained you most? Tell below. Welcome back to Siberia's frozen circus, where the stakes of childbirth were higher than a polar bear on hind legs. We're in the 18th and 19th centuries, a time when nomadic tribes like the Yakut, Chukchi, and Mansi roamed taiga and tundra, herding reindeer, hunting seals, or fishing rivers that froze solid half the year. These women didn't just give birth, they waged war against nature, spirits, and a society that revered their role, while piling on taboos thicker than a mammoth's hide. The irony? While men hunted glory or bargained with gods, women were the real warriors, birthing the next generation in conditions that would send a modern OB-GYN screaming into the snow. Comment below, what's the toughest environment you've ever faced? Could it rival a Siberian winter birth? Let's meet Anya, a Yakut woman in the Lena River Basin, circa 1820. The Yakut, horse-breeding nomads, lived in yurts, wooden frames wrapped in felt, barely cozy in -40 Celsius. Anya's pregnant, her belly a beacon of hope in a land where starvation and wolves were loyal neighbors. Yakut childbirth was a spiritual minefield, ruled by Ajihit, the goddess of fertility, who demanded respect and offerings. Think horsehair braids or milk poured into the fire. Taboos were relentless. Anya couldn't touch sharp objects, lest the baby's soul get cut, or eat rabbit, fearing a timid child. Absurdity alert. She had to avoid looking at the moon too long, or the kid might be born restless. Survival pain. Anya's hauling firewood and milking mares until labor hits, her body worn from months of nomadic grind. The Yakut believed pregnancy was a gift from Urung Artoyon, the sky god, but gifts came with strings. Confess sins, avoid bad omens, or risk a cursed birth. When contractions start, Anya's yurt becomes a sacred stage. Yakut women birthed kneeling, facing the hearth, where the fire spirit, Wat Ijaksi, guarded life. No screaming allowed. Noise could attract evil Ichchi spirits, who'd snatch the baby's soul faster than you can say frostbite. The midwife, often an elder woman called an udigan, was part shaman, part nurse, wielding herbs like wild rosemary and chants to coax Ajihit's favor. If labor stalled, the absurdity kicked in. Anya's husband or family had to perform a soul-calling ritual, banging drums or burning horsehair to lure the baby's spirit. Sarcasm time. Nothing eases contractions like your in-laws drumming while you push in a freezing yurt. Pain. Labor could last days, with Anya gripping a pole, sweat freezing on her skin, no pain relief except maybe fermented mare's milk, which was more placebo than anesthesia. If things went wrong, breach, hemorrhage, the Udigan might sacrifice a foal, its blood sprinkled to appease angry gods. Comment: if you were Anya, which taboo would you secretly break? Mooning the moon or sneaking rabbit stew? Drop your pick below. The baby arrives, let's say a girl, named Kun for the sun, a nod to survival in endless winters. The placenta's a big deal, buried under the yurt's floor or tied to a sacred tree, ensuring the child's soul stays tethered to the tribe. Umbilical cords? Wrapped in cloth, stored in a beaded pouch for luck. Sphagnum moss, that tundra superstar, doubles as diapers, its antibacterial magic a lifesaver in a world without soap. But the pain lingers. Anya is expected to move soon after birth, maybe even ride a horse because nomads don't pause for postpartum recovery. Absurdity. This toughness prevented blood clots, an accidental win, but infections like puerperal fever were killers, with no antibiotics, just prayers to Kaltash Ekfa, the life goddess. Infant mortality? Sky high, 30% or more from cold, malnutrition, or spirits nobody could appease. Irony, the Yakut revered mothers as life-givers, yet gave them no rest, their bodies battlegrounds for tribal survival. Let's shift to the Chukchi, those rugged reindeer herders and seal hunters of the Chukotka Peninsula, where the Arctic Ocean spits ice like a grumpy deity. For a Chukchi woman like Tala, pregnancy was a cosmic contract with Kalet, malevolent spirits who loved meddling. Taboos were a lifestyle. Don't sew during pregnancy or the umbilical cord might strangle the baby. Don't eat seal flippers or the kid's hands would deform. Tala's diet leaned on reindeer meat and fish, rich in nutrients but scarce in lean times, forcing her to chew leather for calories. Survival pain. Pregnant Chukchi, women still trekked with herds, hauling sleds through blizzards, their bodies screaming under the weight. The absurdity? Tala had to purify herself before birth by bathing in icy streams, because nothing says ready for motherhood like a polar plunge. Birth happened in a yaranga, a portable tent of skins with Tala squatting over a fur mat. The midwife, often a grandmother, used chants and seal fat salves to ease pain, but silence was key. Screams invited Kalet to crash the party. If labor dragged, rituals got weird. Family members mimicked labor pains outside, sharing the burden to trick spirits. Sarcasm. Because faking contractions in a snowstorm totally helps Tala push. If the baby was breech, the midwife might massage Tala's belly with warmed stones or burn herbs to guide the child. The baby, let's call him Nanuk for the bear, gets moss swaddling and a cradle of driftwood. The placentas hung in a tree, a gift to the tundra spirits. Pain. Tala's back in the herd days later, nursing while dodging wolves. Absurdity. Chukchi believed a mother's strength passed to the child, so no coddling, just survival. Comment. If you were Tala, what ritual would you ditch? Icy baths or silent labor? Share below. Now, the Mansi, forest hunters of the Ob-Ugrich region, where rivers and spirits ruled. For a Mansi woman like Vaika, pregnancy was a dance with Mir Susnikum, the world-watching man who guarded souls. Taboos included avoiding mirrors, lest the baby's soul get trapped, and not stepping over ropes or the cord might knot. Vaika offered fish or berries to the fire spirit, Pr0, for a safe birth. Survival pain. She hunted or fished until labor, her body battered by taiga life. Births happened in a chum, with elder women assisting, using nettle tea for contractions and birch bark cradles for newborns. If spirits turned nasty, a shaman entered a trance, drumming to negotiate with Kaltash, the fertility goddess. Absurdity. Shamans might fight invisible spirits mid-labor, swinging staffs while Vaika pushed. Irony. These rituals worked psychologically, calming fears, but infections killed without mercy. Postpartum. Vaika smoked over juniper to cleanse, then rejoined the hunt, baby strapped to her back. Let's paint a scene. It's 1830, a Yakut yurt in a snowbound valley. Anya's in labor, kneeling by the hearth, fire crackling as Yaksi's spirit watches. The Udigan, an old woman with eyes like glaciers, chants, burning rosemary to call the baby's soul. Anya grips a wooden pole, biting her lip to stifle cries. Ichchi are listening. Her husband drums outside, confessing a stolen kiss to untie spiritual knots. The baby Kun slides out, cord cut with a flint knife, moss packed around her tiny body. The placenta's buried, smoke cleanses Anya's pain. She's weak, feverish, but the yurt must move tomorrow. Pain. Her body aches, but survival demands she ride. Absurdity. The tribe celebrates Kun's soul, but Anya's just another cog in the nomadic wheel. Engage. If you were the Udigan, what herb or chant would you use for Anya? Drop your shaman hack below. As Russian colonization creeps in, the absurdity grows. By the 19th century, Cossacks and traders disrupt tribal life, demanding furs and loyalty. Some Yakut and Chukchi women face Russian settlers, birthing in yurts under Orthodox priests' glares who call rituals pagan. Pain. Forced baptisms rename babies Ivan or Maria, erasing spirits like Ajihit. Irony. Russians bring civilization, but also smallpox, killing mothers and newborns faster than tundra winters. Yet, tribes adapt. Chukchi midwives hide rituals. Mansi shamans smuggle offerings past priests. Survival's a middle finger to empire, wrapped in fur. This is just the halfway mark, folks. Part 3 digs into colonial impacts, darker pains, and more tribal ingenuity. Hit like if this chilled you, subscribe for more, and comment your location and time. What's the wildest ritual you learned? Spill it below, and let's keep this frozen saga rolling. Welcome back to Siberia's frozen crucible, where childbirth in indigenous tribes was less a miracle and more a survival gauntlet wrapped in reindeer fur and cosmic dread. It's the 19th century, and the Nenets, Yakut, Chukchi, Mansi, and their kin are still wrestling with blizzards, spirits, and now the Russian Empire's heavy boot. Picture women birthing in yurts while Orthodox priests scowl at pagan rituals. Smallpox creeps in with traders, and shamans hide their drums from Cossack raids. The irony? These tribes kept their traditions alive despite invaders who thought civilization meant swapping sacred fires for church candles. Absurdity abounds. While men hunted or bargained with gods, women pushed out the next generation in conditions that make a modern power outage look like a vacation. Comment below, what's the toughest tradition you've ever followed? Could it match birthing in a Siberian blizzard? Let's meet Tuya, a Chukchi woman in the Chukotka Peninsula, circa 1850. The Chukchi, seal hunters and reindeer herders, lived where the Arctic Ocean spits ice like a vengeful deity. Tuya's pregnant, her body toughened by years of hauling sleds and chewing seal blubber for survival. Pregnancy was a spiritual tightrope. Kelet, those pesky evil spirits, lurked, so Tuya avoided sewing or eating certain fish, lest her baby grow fins or a bad attitude. She offered scraps of fat to the fire spirit, Va-Ergen, for protection. But Russian traders brought new threats, smallpox and vodka, both deadlier than any spirit. Survival pain. Tuya's diet, lean on nutrients in winter, left her weak, her belly heavy as she trekked with the herd. Absurdity. She had to confess minor sins like stepping over a rope, or the baby might get tangled in the cord. Sarcasm alert. Nothing preps you for motherhood like admitting you glanced at a walrus the wrong way. When labor hits, Tuya's yaranga, a skin tent, becomes a sacred battlefield. Chukchi women birthed squatting, facing the fire. Silence mandatory to keep Kelet at bay. The midwife, an elder with hands like weathered bark, used seal fat salves and chants to coax the baby out. If labor stalled, the family performed a pain-sharing ritual outside, mimicking Tuya's groans to fool spirits, a cosmic distraction game. Pain, contractions in -30 Celsius, the yaranga's walls flapping like a bad omen, no relief except maybe a sip of fermented fish broth. If things went south, hemorrhage, breach, the midwife burned herbs or called a shaman to wrestle Kelet in a trance, drumming till he collapsed. The baby, let's say a boy, named Quam, an Inuit word for strength, arrives, cord cut with a bone knife, swaddled in moss and fur. The placentas hung in a tree, a gift to the tundra. Absurdity. Tuya's back hurting days later, nursing Quam while dodging wolves, because nomads don't get maternity leave. Irony. The Chukchi revered mothers as life-givers, yet expected them to shrug off birth like it was just another Tuesday. Comment. If you were Tuya, which ritual would you skip? Silent labor or spirit-distracting groans? Drop your choice below. Now, let's ride to the Yakut, horse-breeding nomads of the Lena River. For a woman like Saya, pregnancy was a pact with Ajihit, the fertility goddess, who demanded offerings, milk, butter, or horsehair braids tossed into the fire. Taboos were relentless. No touching knives, no eating hot foods like bear meat, lest the baby come out too fiery. Russian colonization added pressure. Orthodox priests pushed baptisms, calling Yakut rituals devilry. Survival pain. Saya trekked through snow, herding horses while pregnant, her body aching from malnutrition. Smallpox, spreading via Russian traders, killed entire families. Pregnant women were especially vulnerable. Absurdity. Priests demanded Saya name her baby Maria, but she whispered Kun for the son to honor Ajihit. Birth happened in a yurt, kneeling by the hearth, with an Udagun midwife chanting to Yit Jaksi, the fire spirit. If labor dragged, Saya's husband drummed outside, confessing sins like stealing a neighbor's mare. Sarcasm, because nothing speeds delivery like airing family drama in a blizzard. The baby arrives, a girl named after a river spirit, cord tied with sinew, moss packed as a diaper. The placenta is buried under the yurt, tying the child to the land. Pain. Saya's feverish, infection a constant threat, no antibiotics, just nettle tea and prayers. Postpartum, she smoked with Leadham to cleanse, then back to work, baby strapped to her chest. Irony, Russians called Yakut savages, yet their rituals, moss, movement, prevented infections better than some European hospitals. Infant mortality hovered at 40%, cold and disease claiming lives like a grim tax. Comment, if you were Saya, what would you name your baby to defy the priests? Share below. Let's trek to the Mansi, forest hunters of the Ob River. For a woman like Neela, pregnancy meant pleasing Kaltash, the fertility goddess, with fish or berries offered to the fire. Taboos, no mirrors, no crossing streams, lest the baby's soul wander. Russian settlers brought Orthodox churches demanding Neela abandon her gods. Survival pain, Neela hunted and fished till labor, her body battered by taiga life. Births happened in a chum, with elder women using nettle tea and birch bark cradles. Shamans, risking Cossack arrests, entered trances to fight spirits, using fly agaric mushrooms, hallucinogenic and dangerous. Absurdity, a shaman might collapse mid-ritual, leaving Neela to push alone. The baby, named for an ancestor, gets moss swaddling, placenta buried to anchor its soul. Pain, Neela's back in the forest soon, nursing while tracking game, infection lurking. Irony, Mansi rituals demonized by Russians were practical. Moss fought bacteria, movement warded off clots. Let's paint a scene. It's 1860, a Chukchi Yaranga in a howling storm. Tuya squats by the fire, gripping a pole, Va-Ergan's flames flickering. The midwife chants, rubbing seal fat on Tuya's belly, while family outside groans to trick Kaylet. Tuya bites her lip, silencing screams as contractions rip through. Quam arrives, tiny and wailing, cord cut with a flint blade, moss tucked around him. The placenta's hung in a tree, smoke cleanses Tuya's pain. She's weak, shivering, but the herd moves tomorrow. Absurdity, the tribe celebrates Quam's soul, but Tuya's just another cog in the Arctic wheel. Pain, her body screams, yet survival demands she walk. Engage. If you were Tuya's midwife, what herb or chant would you use to ease her labor? Drop your idea below. Russian colonization ramps up the absurdity. By the late 19th century, the empire's pushing orthodoxy and taxes, disrupting tribal rhythms. Nenets and Chukchi hide rituals. Yakut shamans smuggle offerings past priests. Smallpox and tuberculosis, gifts from traders, kill mothers and babies faster than spirits ever did. Irony, Russian progress brings hospitals, but they're far from nomads and doctors scorn tribal ways. Pain, forced settlements starve herds, breaking the food chain that kept pregnant women strong. Yet tribes resist. Mansi women birth in secret. Chukchi midwives chant under Russian noses. Survival's a rebellion, a middle finger to empire wrapped in fur. Sarcasm check. The Russian Empire saves Siberia by wrecking its soul, while women birth in defiance, their babies named for spirits Moscow couldn't crush. Stay tuned for part 4, where we wrap this saga with Soviet shadows and fading traditions. Hit like if this froze you, subscribe for the final chill, and comment your location and time. What's the wildest fact you learned? Spill it below, and let's keep this tundra tale alive. Here we are in the late 19th to early 20th century, where Siberia's indigenous tribes, Nenets, Yakut, Chukchi, Mansi, face a world turning upside down. The Russian Empire's grip tightens, Orthodox priests preach salvation, and smallpox spreads like bad gossip. Soon, the Soviets will bulldoze traditions, forcing nomads into settlements that starve their souls. Yet, women still birth in yurts, chanting to spirits while dodging colonial glares. Childbirth remains a primal act of defiance, wrapped in fur, moss, and rituals that laugh in the face of progress. Irony alert, as empires and ideologies clash, these women keep their tribes alive, birthing babies in conditions that would make a modern hospital faint. Absurdity? Oh, it's thicker than a Siberian blizzard. Comment below. What's the most outdated tradition you've heard of? Does it beat confessing sins to untie a baby's soul? Let's meet Lida, a Nenets woman on the Yamal Peninsula in 1890. The Nenets, reindeer nomads, live in chums, tents of hide that shake in Arctic winds. Lida's pregnant, her body honed by years of sled hauling and ice fishing, but Russian traders bring new threats, disease and taxes that thin the herd. Pregnancy taboos are a maze. No eating raw fish, lest the baby be slippery. No crossing rivers, or the child's soul might drown. Lida offers reindeer fat to Ja Nebya, the Earth Mother, but Russian priests demand she baptize her unborn child Ivan. Survival pain. Lida's malnourished, her diet lean as winter rations dwindle, yet she treks with the herd, belly heavy. Absurdity. She must confess sins like glancing at a lame reindeer, or risk a cursed birth. Sarcasm. Nothing preps you for labor like whispering your faults to a shaman while frostbite nips your toes. When contractions hit, Lida's chum is a sacred arena. Nenet's women birth kneeling, facing the fire, then turning to honor Tuhada, the fire spirit. Screaming's taboo, noise invites evil spirits, so Lida bites a leather strap, her grunts muffled by the howling wind. The Shunebya, an elder midwife, rubs Lida's belly with warmed moss, chanting to ward off malevolent forces. If labor stalls, Lida's husband ties knots outside, confessing minor betrayals, a stolen pelt, a harsh word, to untangle the birth. Pain, hours in -40 Celsius, the chum's walls flapping, no relief except chaga tea, bitter as regret. If things go wrong, breach, bleeding, the Shunebya burns ledum herbs or calls a shaman to drum away spirits. The baby, a boy, named Numi for strength, arrives, cord cut with a bone knife, swaddled in sphagnum moss, nature's antibacterial miracle. The placenta's buried under the fire pit, tying Numi to the tundra. Absurdity. Lida's expected to walk days later, nursing while hurting, because nomads don't pause. Irony. The Nenets revere mothers, yet give them no rest, their bodies battlegrounds for survival. Comment. If you were Lida, which taboo would you break? Screaming or eating that fish? Drop your choice below. Zooming out, the Yakut and the Lena River Basin face similar struggles. For a woman like Oyuna, pregnancy is a pact with Ajit, the fertility goddess, but Russian Orthodoxy demands she swap sacred fires for church icons. Taboos. No sharp objects, no hot foods like bear meat, lest the baby be born fiery. Smallpox, spreading via traders, kills entire clans. Oyuna is lucky to survive, but malnutrition weakens her. Birth happens in a yurt, kneeling by the hearth, with an Udigan midwife chanting to Yit Yaksi. If labor drags, family drums outside, confessing sins to untie spiritual knots. Sarcasm, because nothing speeds delivery like your cousin admitting he stole a horse. The baby, named Sarda for light, gets moss diapers and a birch cradle. The placenta's buried, smoke cleanses Oyuna, but she's back riding horses soon, fever lurking. Pain, infection's a killer, no antibiotics, just nettle tea. Irony, Yakut rituals, scorned by Russians, prevent clots better than some colonial hospitals. In Chukotka, Chukchi women like Kala birth in Yarangas, dodging Kalet spirits with taboos. No sewing, no eating seal flippers. Russian whalers bring disease and alcohol, thinning herds and hope. Kela births squatting, silent, with a midwife using seal fat salves. Rituals get absurd. Family mimics labor pains to trick spirits. The baby, named for a sea spirit, gets fur swaddling, placenta hung in a tree. Pain, Kayla's back hurting, nursing in blizzards. Irony, Chukchi mothers are sacred, yet expected to endure like pack animals. Comment. If you were Kala, what would you name your baby to defy the Russians? Share below. The Mansi, forest hunters, face Kaltash's rules. For Nera, pregnancy means offerings, fish, berries, to the fire spirit. Russians push orthodoxy, arresting shamans who aid births with trances. Nera births in a chum, elders using nettle tea, baby swaddled in moss. Absurdity, shamans risk exile to fight spirits mid-labor. Pain, Nera hunts post-birth. Infection, a constant threat. Irony, Mansi rituals, demonized outsmart infection better than Russian medicine. Let's paint a scene. It's 1900, a Nenet's chum in a Yamal blizzard. Lida kneels by the fire, gripping a pole. two hot as flames flickering. The shoe Nebbia chants, rubbing moss on Lita's belly, while her husband knots a belt outside, confessing a petty theft. Lita bites leather, stifling screams as spirits lurk. Numi arrives, cord cut, moss packed, placenta buried. Smoke cleanses Lita, but fever creeps in. She's up soon, nursing in the herd's shadow. Absurdity, the tribe celebrates Numi's soul, but Lida's a cog in the tundra machine. Pain, her body aches, yet survival demands she move. Engage. If you were the Shunebja, what herb or chant would you use for Lita? Drop your shaman tip below. The Soviet era looms, and absurdity peaks. By the 1920s, forced settlements starve herds, boarding schools steal kids, and hospitals replace yurts. Pain, smallpox and TB kill faster than spirits. Soviet doctors scorn moss and chants, yet offer no better care. Nenets and Chukchi hide rituals. Yakut midwives whisper to Ajihit in secret. Irony, progress brings hunger, while old ways, moss, movement, kept women alive. Infant mortality stays brutal, 30 to 40% as empires erase traditions. Sarcasm check. The Soviets save Siberia by breaking its heart, but women birth in defiance, naming babies for spirits empires couldn't crush. Numi, Sarda, Kun. These mothers, from tundra to taiga, wove resilience into every fur cradle, their pain a silent rebellion against history's cruelty. This wraps our Siberian saga. From Nenet's chums to Yakut yurts, women birthed in a world of absurdity and pain, their babies carrying names like torches against the cold. Thanks for enduring this frozen ride. Hit like if it gripped you, subscribe for more, and comment your location and time. Where are you watching from? What's the wildest fact you learned? Spill it below, and let's keep this tundra tribe alive. So, you think your winter is a bit of a drag? You complain when the thermostat dips, when your car won't start, and when you have to put on an extra layer to take the trash out. That's cute. Adorable, even. Now, I want you to imagine a winter so cold it cracks steel. A darkness so complete it feels like a physical weight. And just to spice things up, imagine nearly 500,000 men, thousands of tanks, and endless waves of bombers have decided that your frozen, miserable homeland is now their property. This isn't a dystopian fantasy. This was the reality for Finland in 1939. This is the story of the Winter War, a 3-month-long international incident where a nation of 4 million told the Soviet Union, one of the world's most terrifying superpowers, to take a long walk off a short, frozen pier. It's a story of unbelievable courage, tactical genius, and a level of sheer, bloody-minded stubbornness that can only be described by a word the Finns have themselves: sisu. So grab your blanket, pour a hot drink, and thank whatever god you pray to that you're not on the Karelian Isthmus in December 1939. This is how a handful of farmers gave a giant a nosebleed so severe, the whole world stopped to watch. Our story begins in the delightful, not at all ominous year of 1939. Europe is holding its breath, waiting to see what the two angriest men on the continent, a certain German with a silly mustache and a Soviet with an even sillier one, are going to do next. The answer, it turns out, is they're going to be best friends. For a little while, anyway. In August, they signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, a non-aggression treaty that came with a secret protocol, which was basically the two of them drawing lines on a map of Europe with a crayon, dividing up the spoils. Poland gets a VIP ticket to oblivion. The Baltic states are put in the Soviet Union's shopping cart, and Finland, well, Finland is listed under desert. Joseph Stalin, a man not exactly known for his gentle diplomacy or respect for personal space, looked at the map and saw a problem. The Finnish border was only 32 kilometers, a mere 20 miles, from Leningrad. That's a Sunday morning jog for a determined army. From Stalin's paranoid perspective, this was like having a stranger with a loaded gun constantly peering into your living room window. He worried that some hostile power, say Nazi Germany, could use Finland as a launch pad for an attack. So, he did what any reasonable, peace-loving dictator would do. He sent a list of demands to the Finns. The Soviet requests were, to put it mildly, audacious. They wanted Finland to hand over several islands in the Gulf of Finland, lease the Honko Peninsula for a Soviet naval base, and most importantly, push the border on the Karelian Isthmus further away from Leningrad. In exchange, The Soviets generously offered a slice of practically useless frozen swamp further north in eastern Karelia. It was the geopolitical equivalent of someone demanding the keys to your house, your car, and your firstborn child, and offering you a half-eaten sandwich in return. The Finns were in an impossible position. They were a young democracy, having only gained independence from Russia 2 decades earlier after a bloody civil war. They valued their hard-won freedom above all else. They sent their delegation to Moscow, led by the statesman J.K. Paasikivi. The negotiations were a farce. Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov was famously blunt. When the Finns argued and pleaded, he simply stated, "We civilians can't seem to make any headway. Now it is the soldiers' turn to speak." That's the 1930s diplomatic equivalent of dropping the microphone and walking off stage. The Finns knew what was coming. They had tried to reason, they had tried to negotiate, but the conclusion was unavoidable. They went home and prepared for the inevitable. The government issued a public statement. They would yield on some points, but they would not compromise their sovereignty. They would not become a Soviet puppet state. Now let's meet our 2 contenders for this ridiculously lopsided boxing match. In the red corner, weighing in at an astronomical 170 million people, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. The Red Army that assembled on Finland's border was a terrifying spectacle. Nearly 500,000 soldiers, over 2,000 tanks, and more than 1,000 aircraft. On paper, it was an unstoppable force, the very hammer of the proletariat revolution, ready to smash the tiny capitalist nation next door. They were told this would be a walk in the park, a liberation. They were assured the Finnish working class would rise up and welcome them with flowers and cheers. Spoilers, they did not. The Soviet soldiers were equipped for a quick, decisive war. Their uniforms were a lovely shade of khaki brown, perfect for blending in with, well, not snow. Their tanks were designed for the rolling plains of Central Europe, not the dense, trackless forests and swamps of Finland. Their leadership, decimated by Stalin's recent purges, was a collection of loyal party yes-men and terrified officers who knew that failure meant a one-way trip to a Siberian gulag, or worse. And in the blue and white corner, the Republic of Finland. Population, less than 4 million. Standing army, barely existent. When the call for mobilization went out, it was a scramble. Finland had maybe 30 tanks in total, most of them museum pieces. Their air force was a charming collection of antique planes. Their soldiers had no standard issue uniform. Men showed up in their own winter clothes, creating a motley civilian look. They called this patchwork ensemble Model Kajander, a sarcastic jab at the Prime Minister who had insisted they didn't need to spend much on the military. Their primary anti-tank weapon was hope, soon to be followed by a thrown bundle of grenades and most famously, a glass bottle filled with flammable liquid. The Finns didn't have much, but they had 3 things the Soviets severely underestimated. They had the home field advantage. They had a population that was absolutely, resolutely united against the invader, and they had Sisu. Sisu doesn't have a direct English translation. It's a blend of courage, resilience, grim determination, and sheer stubbornness. It's a spirit you summon when you're out of options, out of energy, and out of hope, but you refuse to quit. It's the quiet internal fire that says, "You might kill me, but you will not beat me." This wasn't an army of professional soldiers. It was an army of lumberjacks, farmers, teachers, and hunters. Men who had lived their entire lives in these forests. Men who could ski before they could walk, who could read the landscape like a book, and who could shoot a moose from 300 meters with their old hunting rifle. They were about to show the Red Army that a man defending his home is a very different animal from a soldier invading someone else's. On the 30th of November, 1939, the talking stopped. Without a formal declaration of war, the Soviet Union attacked. Bombers appeared over Helsinki, dropping their deadly cargo on the capital. Across the border, Soviet divisions began their advance. The plan was simple, arrogant, and beautiful in its stupidity. The Red Army would punch through the Finnish defenses on the Karelian Isthmus, capture the city of Viipuri, and be in Helsinki for a victory parade within 2 weeks, just in time for Stalin's 60th birthday. Other forces would slice through the narrow waste of Finland further north and cut the country in 2. It was a textbook blitzkrieg, conceived by men who had never seen a Finnish forest in winter, and then they met the general. Not a man, but an entity, General Talvi, General Winter, The winter of 1939 to 1940 was one of the coldest in recorded history. Temperatures regularly plunged to minus 40 degrees Celsius, a neat little point on the scale where Celsius and Fahrenheit meet up to agree that it is, objectively, too damn cold to be alive. For the Soviet soldiers, poorly equipped and utterly unprepared, this was a fresh new hell. Their olive-drab uniforms made them perfect silhouettes against the blinding white snow. Their lubricating oils in their vehicles and machine guns froze solid. Their tanks, confined to the few plowed roads, became easy targets. Frostbite claimed more casualties than bullets in some units. Soldiers, terrified of freezing to death in their sleep, would leave their truck engines running all night, draining precious fuel and announcing their position to any Finnish ski patrol within earshot. The Finns, on the other hand, were in their element. They were born in this. They wore white snow camouflage, making them all but invisible. They moved on skis, silent and swift, gliding through the dense forest like ghosts. They knew how to stay warm, how to live off the land, how to use the cold itself as a weapon. They didn't have the numbers to meet the Red Army head-on, so they refused to fight the war the Soviets wanted. The Finns wouldn't engage in pitched battles. Why would they? That was suicide. Instead, they became predators. They let the long Soviet columns advance deep into the forest along the narrow, winding roads. The columns were miles long, a conga line of tanks, trucks, and marching men, completely blind to what was happening in the woods just a few feet away. Then, the Finns would strike. A felled tree here, a mine there, to block the road at the front of the column, another at the back. The column was now trapped, immobilized, and then the forest would come alive. This was the birth of a tactic that would become legendary, matti warfare. The word matti is Finnish for a cubic meter of firewood, a neat, cut, and stacked pile ready for the stove. The Finns applied this domestic concept to total war. They would slice the trapped Soviet columns into smaller, isolated pockets, mattis. Each matti was a self-contained bubble of Soviet soldiers, cut off from supply, from communication, and from hope. The Finns wouldn't necessarily storm the matti. That would be a waste of their own precious manpower. Instead, they would lay siege to it. They'd pick off the supply kitchens first to demoralize the men and starve them out. Snipers would target officers and commissars. Small, shocking raids would come from all directions, at all hours, before melting back into the white silence. For the Soviet soldier trapped in a matti, it was a nightmare beyond comprehension. The world shrank to a few hundred meters of frozen road. The enemy was everywhere and nowhere. The trees themselves seemed to have rifles. The cold was a constant gnawing beast. Food ran out. Ammunition ran low. The Finns would sometimes broadcast propaganda over loudspeakers, the tempting sounds of a crackling fire and food being cooked, followed by promises of warm captivity. It was psychological warfare at its most primal and cruel. The Finns were turning the forest, their home, into a weapon of terror, breaking not just the bodies but the minds of the invading army. And amongst these white-clad ghosts, one was already becoming a legend. A quiet farmer, no taller than 5'3", armed with a standard-issue Mosin Nagant rifle with no telescopic scope. His name was Simo Haiha, but the Soviets would come to know him by a different name, the White Death. But his story, and the true horror of the mattis, is just beginning. The giant had taken its first step and stumbled, hard. It was now bleeding in the snow, confused, enraged, and surrounded by ghosts, and the winter was only getting colder. What do you think would be going through your mind if you were a soldier trapped in one of those frozen pockets, awaiting an enemy you can't see? Let me know what you think in the comments. It's a hell of a thing to imagine. To understand the sheer, unadulterated terror the Finns inflicted, you don't need to look at a general's grand strategy map. You need to look at one man lying motionless in the snow for hours, sometimes days, in temperatures that would make a polar bear reconsider its life choices. His name, as we mentioned, was Simo Haiha, and he was about to become the deadliest sniper in human history. Let's put this in perspective. The average soldier in World War II might not even see the man who killed him. But for the Soviet soldiers on the Kola riverfront, the danger had a face even if they never saw it. They just knew him as Belaya Smirt, the White Death. Haiha was the physical embodiment of Sisu, a small, unassuming farmer. He preferred to use the standard-issue Finnish Mosin Nagant rifle, a weapon with no telescopic scope. That's right, the most successful sniper in history used iron sights. He claimed scopes fogged up in the intense cold. The glass could glint in the low winter sun, and they forced a sniper to raise his head higher, presenting a bigger target. So he relied on his eyes and a lifetime of experience, judging distances in the Finnish wilderness. His methods were a masterclass in survival and predation. Before taking up his position, he would compact the snow in front of him so the muzzle blast from his rifle wouldn't kick up a telltale puff of white. He kept a small amount of snow in his mouth to prevent his warm breath from creating a visible vapor trail in the freezing air. He was less a soldier and more a feature of the landscape, a deadly bump in the snow that you wouldn't notice until it was far, far too late. The Soviets became obsessed with him. They sent their own snipers to hunt him. Hey-Ha killed them. They sent entire squads to flush him out. Hey-Ha would disappear, only to pick them off one by one from a new position. They resorted to carpet bombing his suspected locations with heavy artillery. He would be gone, only to return the next day. In just over 3 months, he was officially credited with 505 confirmed kills with his rifle. And just for good measure, he also dispatched over 200 more with the Suomi KP-31 submachine gun, bringing his total to over 700. This wasn't a man. This was a one-man plague. His existence was a constant gnawing psychological attack on the Red Army. Every shadow, every snowdrift could be the White Death. The fear he inspired was worth more than a whole division of Finnish soldiers. He demonstrated a fundamental truth of this war. The Finns weren't just fighting with guns. They were fighting with the forest, with the snow, with the darkness, and with a patience born from a land that demands it for survival. This principle of using the environment as a weapon was perfected in the Mahdi tactics. Inside these pockets of encirclement, the proud Red Army disintegrated. Command and control vanished. A Soviet lieutenant, trapped with his men, had no idea what was happening a kilometer down the road, let alone back at headquarters. Radio batteries died in the cold and couldn't be replaced. The Finns, moving like phantoms on their skis, would sever communication lines as quickly as they were laid. The forest, which was supposed to be a flank to be secured, became an impassable wall of white terror. Life in a Mahdi was a slow descent into a frozen hell. First, the food ran out. The Soviets, expecting a short war, had not packed for a winter camping trip. Soldiers were reduced to eating frozen bread, then the oats meant for their horses, then the horses themselves. When that was gone, some resorted to chewing on leather belts and boots. Then came the cold, a relentless, insidious enemy. Frostbite was rampant. Men would huddle together for warmth, their uniforms frozen stiff, their faces covered in ice. Sleep was a gamble. To fall too deeply asleep was to risk never waking up. And always, there was the enemy you could not see. The crack of a Finnish sniper's rifle, always from an unexpected direction. The sudden, terrifying assault of a Finnish ski patrol, emerging from the woods with submachine guns blazing, throwing grenades, and then vanishing before a proper defense could be mounted. These weren't battles, they were slaughters. The Finns called these small units sausage patrols, because their primary mission was often to raid the Soviet field kitchens, stealing food and spreading chaos. Imagine the psychological impact. You are starving, freezing, surrounded by a silent, invisible enemy, and the one thing you look forward to, a meager portion of hot soup, is suddenly stolen by ghosts who kill your cooks and disappear into the blizzard. This brings us to the most legendary and horrifying example of Mahdi warfare, the Battle of the Rate Road. In the north, the Soviet 163rd and 44th Rifle Divisions had a clear objective: advance along the Rate Road, slice Finland in half at its narrowest point, and capture the city of Oulu. This would cut Finland's main rail link with Sweden and effectively cripple the country. The 44th Division was a crack unit, a motorized rifle division from the Ukrainian military district. They were well equipped, confident, and utterly catastrophically unprepared for what awaited them. They were a mechanized force sent into a wilderness with one single primitive road, surrounded by a trackless, frozen wasteland. It was like trying to sail a battleship down a muddy creek. The Finns, under the command of the brilliant Colonel Paavo Talvela, had just one division, the 9th, to stop 2. They were outnumbered almost 3 to 1, but they didn't care about numbers. They cared about geography. They let the Soviet 163rd Division advance and take the small town of Suomussalmi. Then, just like with the smaller Mahtis, they cut the road behind them. The 163rd was now trapped. Then, the Finns turned their attention to the town itself. In brutal, close quarters fighting, they retook Suomussalmi, annihilating the 163rd Division in the process. Soviet soldiers who tried to flee across the frozen lakes were mercilessly hunted down by Finnish ski patrols. Meanwhile, the elite 44th Division was advancing down the road to rescue the already doomed 163rd. They walked directly into the grinder. The Finnish 9th Division, fresh from its victory, performed the same trick again, but on a much larger scale. They blocked the road in front of the 44th and behind it. The entire division, over 15,000 men, hundreds of tanks, trucks, and artillery pieces, was now trapped on a narrow 25-mile stretch of forest road. And then, for 2 weeks, the Finns systematically dismantled it. They didn't just cut the column into smaller Mahtis, they created dozens of them. Each pocket was a self-contained island of desperation. The Finns set up machine gun nests on the flanks, established fields of fire, and waited. The temperatures dropped to minus 40 degrees. The Ukrainians, in their summer weight uniforms, began to freeze to death in droves. Soviet attempts to break out were disastrous. Tanks trying to maneuver off the road sank into the deep snow and were abandoned. Infantry charges were cut to pieces by Finnish machine guns. The Finns were patient. They'd ski in, launch a furious attack on a specific point, destroy a few tanks with Molotov cocktails and bundled charges, kill as many men as they could, and then fade back into the forest before the Soviets could organize a counterattack. The Molotov cocktail, by the way, deserves a special mention. The Finns didn't invent the firebomb, but they perfected it and gave it its iconic name. It was a sarcastic toast to the Soviet Foreign Minister Molotov, who had claimed on Soviet radio that they weren't dropping bombs on Finland, but rather delivering humanitarian food aid. The Finns, with their grim sense of humor, dubbed the cluster bombs Molotov's breadbaskets and decided they needed a drink to go with the food. The state-run alcohol monopoly Alko mass-produced hundreds of thousands of these simple, deadly weapons, a bottle filled with gasoline, tar, and potassium chlorate, with a storm-proof match or a rag for a fuse. A well-aimed cocktail could disable a tank by setting its engine compartment on fire or blinding its crew. It was the great equalizer, a peasant's weapon that could kill a machine of war. And on the right road, they were used with devastating effect. By the first week of January 1940, it was over. The 44th Division ceased to exist. The Finns walked down the road and surveyed the scene. What they found was a frozen monument to military incompetence. For miles, the road was choked with the wreckage of war. Over 400 tanks, 200 trucks, dozens of artillery pieces, anti-aircraft guns, staff cars, field kitchens, all abandoned and frozen solid, and everywhere there were the bodies. Thousands of them frozen in the positions they had died in. Statues of men caught in a winter they could not comprehend. The Finns had suffered a few hundred casualties. They had destroyed 2 entire Soviet divisions, killing or capturing over 23,000 men. The loot was staggering. The poorly equipped Finnish army suddenly found itself the recipient of an unplanned foreign aid package, courtesy of Joseph Stalin. They captured so much equipment they could arm several new divisions. The Rat Road was a total, unmitigated disaster for the Red Army, and a stunning, almost unbelievable victory for Finland. The world's press was invited in to see the spectacle, and the pictures they sent back shocked the globe. David hadn't just beaten Goliath, he had dismembered him, looted his corpse, and put his head on a spike for all the world to see. The legend of Finnish resistance was cemented, but this was just one front. To the south, on the Karelian Isthmus, the main Soviet thrust had been blunted, but not broken. There, the Finns weren't relying on forests and skis, but on a line of concrete and steel fortifications, the Mannerheim Line. Stalin, humiliated and enraged by the disasters in the north, was about to turn the full, terrifying, and now much wiser might of the Soviet Union upon this single point. The war of ghosts and shadows was about to become a war of brute, overwhelming force. How do you think the Soviet High Command reacted to the news from the right road? I bet the language used wasn't suitable for children. Share your thoughts on what that meeting with Stalin must have been like in the comments below. The victories in the north were a shot of adrenaline for the Finnish people and a source of utter fascination for the outside world. The tale of the Right Road was a perfect David and Goliath story, tailor-made for newspaper headlines. It was clean, in a way. It was the clever little guy outsmarting the clumsy giant in the pristine wilderness. But while the world was falling in love with the romantic image of the lone Finnish ski trooper, the ghost in the snow, the real war, the meat grinder, was happening in the south. On the Karelian Isthmus, there was no room for elegant maneuvers or clever encirclements. This was a slugging match. This was where the bulk of the Red Army was concentrated, and where Finland had built its last best hope of survival. A line of fortifications known to the world as the Mannerheim Line. Now, Soviet propaganda, in a desperate attempt to explain why their glorious Red Army was being held at bay by a bunch of farmers, painted the Mannerheim Line as an impenetrable fortress of steel and concrete, a rival to the French Maginot Line or the German Siegfried Line. They spoke of underground cities, legions of tanks hidden in secret bunkers, and artillery positions that could withstand a direct nuclear strike. Had nuclear strikes been invented yet? This was, to put it politely, complete and utter nonsense. The Mannerheim Line was the geopolitical equivalent of putting a deadbolt on your front door after you notice a grizzly bear is trying to get in. It was something, but it wasn't going to hold forever. In reality, the line was a series of defensive positions, most of them built in the 1920s and woefully outdated by 1939. There were just over 200 machine gun nests and concrete bunkers, many of them small and poorly designed, scattered across a 135-kilometer front. It wasn't a continuous wall. It was a collection of strong points connected by trenches and barbed wire. The real strength of the Mannerheim Line wasn't the concrete, it was the landscape. The Finns, led by their stoic and brilliant commander-in-chief, Marshal Carl Gustaf Emil Mannerheim, had used their greatest assets, the terrain. The line was anchored on the massive Lake Ladoga to the east and the Gulf of Finland to the west. In between, it snaked through a landscape of impassable forests, frozen swamps, and countless smaller lakes. The fortifications were placed to channel any attacking force into pre-selected killing zones. The Mannerheim Line wasn't a wall, it was a hornet's nest, and the Finns had just poked it with a very big, very angry, and very humiliated bear. Back in Moscow, Stalin was not having a good 60th birthday. The promised 2-week victory parade in Helsinki was now a distant, laughable memory. The Red Army, the pride of the Soviet Union, had become an international laughingstock. Heads were going to roll, and they did. The original commander, Kliment Voroshilov, a political crony with all the military genius of a confused badger, was quietly sidelined. In his place, Stalin appointed Semyon Timoshenko, a much more competent and utterly ruthless commander. Timoshenko was given a simple one-item to-do list: break Finland and do it now. No more clever plans, no more trying to be fancy. The new strategy was as subtle as a brick to the face. Timoshenko gathered a force of staggering proportions. The Red Army concentrated over 600,000 men, a fresh, massive wave of humanity on the Karelian Isthmus. They brought in thousands of new tanks and, most importantly, an obscene amount of artillery. The plan was simple. They would pick a single narrow sector of the Mannerheim Line, the area around the village of Suma, and they would erase it from the face of the earth. For weeks, the Soviets amassed their forces. The Finns in their bunkers could only watch and wait, listening to the constant rumble of trucks and tanks on the other side of the border, a sound like a coming earthquake. Then, on February 1st, 1940, the earthquake hit. Timoshenko unleashed an artillery barrage of an intensity the world had never before seen. For days on end, a relentless storm of steel rained down on the Finnish positions. The Finns called it Hell's Concerto. Thousands of guns, mortars, and rocket launchers fired in unison, a constant deafening roar that never stopped day or night. The very ground shook. The snow-covered landscape was churned into a black and brown moonscape of craters and shattered trees. The sky was permanently dark with smoke and cordite. For the Finnish soldiers huddled in their concrete bunkers, it was a unique form of torture. The structures, never designed for this kind of punishment, began to crumble. The noise was indescribable, a physical force that vibrated through your bones and rattled your teeth. Men went mad from the sheer, unending concussion. Communication lines were shredded. Sleep was impossible. It was a systematic industrial attempt to pulverize not just the fortifications, but the sanity of the men inside them. And then, after the barrage lifted, came the infantry. This wasn't the clumsy, unprepared Red Army of December. This was a new, more determined beast. They came in waves, human waves, trudging forward across the frozen, cratered fields, directly into the sights of the Finnish machine guns. The Finnish defenders, deafened and shell-shocked, would crawl out of their wrecked shelters, man their machine guns, and do their grim work. The first wave would be cut down. The second wave would advance over the bodies of the first. The third would use the growing piles of their own dead comrades as cover. It was an inhuman calculus of slaughter. The Soviets were trading lives for meters of ground, and they had millions of lives to trade. The Finns had only a few 100,000. A Finnish veteran later described the scene. It was an endless river of men. We would fire our machine guns until the barrels glowed red. We would run out of ammunition, replace the barrels, and they would still be coming. We killed them, and killed them, and killed them, and still they came. The psychological toll on the Finnish soldiers was immense. It's one thing to fight a clever war of ambushes in the forest. It's another thing entirely to be a cog in a machine of mass slaughter, to watch thousands of men march willingly into your guns day after day. The Finns were not just exhausted physically, their souls were being worn down by the sheer, brutal attrition. The Soviets also deployed new tactics. They would roll their tanks right up to the Finnish bunkers, using them as mobile shields for their infantry. Once at point-blank range, the tanks would blast the bunker's firing slits, while engineers would run forward with massive explosive charges to blow the structures apart. Other units brought up heavy artillery pieces for direct fire, essentially using them as giant sniper rifles to demolish the concrete pillboxes one by one. The Battle of Suma became the focal point of the entire war. For 2 weeks, the Finns held on with a courage that bordered on the suicidal. They fought amidst the ruins of their own line, launching desperate counterattacks, often at night, to retake lost positions. Stories of incredible heroism emerged. A single Finnish soldier might hold off a company with a submachine gun until he was overwhelmed. Small anti-tank teams, the tank destroyers, would hunt the Soviet T-26 and T-28 tanks in the labyrinth of trenches with their satchel charges and Molotov cocktails. But heroism has its limits. Courage cannot create ammunition out of thin air. Bravery cannot replace men who are dead or wounded. The Finnish army was bleeding to death. They had no reserves. The men on the line had been fighting for over 2 months with no relief. Finally, on February 15th, after 2 weeks of unrelenting hell, the line broke. The Soviets had poured so much men and material into this one sector that they finally punched a hole through the Finnish defenses. It wasn't a glorious breakthrough, it was a slow, grinding, bloody tear in the fabric of the front. The Mannerheim Line, the symbol of Finnish resistance, had been breached. This changed the entire nature of the war. The fighting now moved from static trench warfare into a war of movement, in terrain that was more favorable to the Soviet tanks. The Finns began a fighting withdrawal, making the Red Army pay a horrific price for every village, every river crossing, every frozen kilometer of their homeland. They were still fighting with incredible skill in Sassu, but they were no longer stopping the advance, they were only slowing it. The gateway to the heart of Finland was now open, and the city of Viipuri, Finland's second largest city, lay directly in the path of the Soviet juggernaut. The military situation was becoming critical. The Finns had shocked the world and humiliated the Red Army, but the giant, for all its wounds, was now awake, angry, and standing on their doorstep. The question was no longer if the Finns could win. The question was, could they survive? Let us know in the comments what you believe is the most crucial element in defending one's homeland. Advanced weaponry, strategic location, or the sheer will of its people. The romantic war of ghosts and shadows, of ski patrols and clever ambushes, was over. The breach of the Mannerheim Line marked the beginning of the end. What followed was not a story of brilliant tactics, but of pure, unadulterated grit. The war had entered its final, ugliest phase. The meat grinder had been switched to its highest setting, and the Finnish army was being fed into it, piece by bloody piece. The goal was no longer to win. It was to make the cost of victory so astronomically high for the Soviets that they might, just might, be willing to talk before Finland as a nation ceased to exist. The Finnish retreat was not a rout. It was a masterclass in organized, desperate defense. They fell back from the ruins of the Mannerheim line to new, hastily prepared defensive positions. Every river, every ridge, every village became a new fortress to be defended to the last man. The Soviets, for their part, were learning. They were no longer the disorganized rabble of December. They advanced methodically, using their overwhelming superiority in artillery and tanks to blast a path forward. But the Finns made them pay for every single step. A small unit of Finnish soldiers, armed with a few machine guns and a box of Molotov cocktails, would hold a road junction for a day, kill 100 men, destroy a few tanks, and then slip away into the woods at night just before their position was completely overrun. It was heroic, it was costly, and it was ultimately feudal. They were delaying the inevitable, trading space for time, and buying that time with the blood of their best men. The focus of the Soviet advance was the ancient city of Viipuri. To the Finns, Viipuri was not just a city, it was a piece of their soul. It was a historic, beautiful port, a cultural and economic jewel on the Karelian Isthmus. To lose it would be a devastating blow. The Red Army pushed towards it relentlessly, but the final, most surreal battle for the city took place not on land, but on the frozen sea. In late February and early March, Timoshenko, impatient with the slow grind on land, made a bold and frankly insane decision. He ordered his men to outflank Viipuri by attacking across the frozen surface of Viipuri Bay, a wide expanse of the Gulf of Finland. What followed was one of the most bizarre and terrifying battlefields in modern history. Entire Soviet divisions, complete with tanks, trucks, and artillery, began to advance across the ice. Imagine the scene. A vast, flat, white plain stretching for miles with no cover whatsoever. On this plain, thousands of men and hundreds of vehicles were crawling forward, a dark stain on the pristine snow. And on the far shore, the Finnish coastal artillery, guns normally meant to engage warships, lowered their barrels and opened fire. It was a turkey shoot. Every shell that hit the ice sent up a geyser of water and deadly shards. But more terrifying were the shells that punched through, creating massive holes that swallowed men and machines whole, or creating vast networks of cracks that would suddenly give way, plunging an entire platoon into the freezing dark water below. The Finns fought with desperate ingenuity. They sawed massive trenches in the ice to stop the tanks. They placed mines under the snow. Ski patrols would race out onto the ice at night, throw their charges and speed away, leaving chaos in their wake. But the Soviets just kept coming. They built makeshift bridges out of logs to cross the gaps in the ice. They advanced at night. When their tanks were destroyed, the infantry used the burning hulks as cover and sources of warmth. They were dying in droves, frozen, drowned, and blown apart, but they were advancing. Their sheer numbers were an elemental force, like a glacier of flesh and steel, and the ice itself was groaning under the weight of their assault. They established a beachhead on the western shore of the bay, effectively encircling Viipuri. The heart of Karelia was now cut off and bleeding out. While this frozen hellscape was unfolding, the Finns were desperately looking to the outside world for a miracle. And the outside world? It responded with a tidal wave of sympathy and not much else. The League of Nations, that grand and utterly useless debating society, condemned the Soviet aggression and then expelled the USSR, an act with all the diplomatic force of a sternly worded post-it note. Across the globe, people were captivated by Finland's plight. Money was raised, ambulances were sent, newspapers wrote glowing editorials about brave little Finland. It was all very heartwarming and completely inadequate. A few thousand foreign volunteers did arrive to fight for Finland, mostly from Sweden, Norway, and Hungary. These were brave men, and the Finns were grateful for their help. But they were too few, and they arrived too late to change the strategic situation. The real hope lay with the great powers, Britain and France. And here, the story descends from tragedy into farce. The British and French, already in a phony war with Germany, saw the Winter War not so much as a moral crusade, but as a convenient opportunity. They cooked up a plan to send a 100,000-strong expeditionary force to help Finland. It sounded great. There was just one tiny problem. To get to Finland, they would have to land in neutral Norway and cross neutral Sweden. Both Norway and Sweden, terrified of being dragged into a war with both the Soviet Union and Germany, took one look at this plan and said, absolutely not. The real unspoken goal of the Anglo-French plan was to seize the vital Swedish iron ore fields at Kiruna, denying them to the German war machine. Helping Finland was just a convenient excuse. Finland, fighting for its very existence, had become a pawn in a much larger, more cynical game. The help was never coming. The Finnish government, led by President Risto Ryti, understood the grim reality. Their army was at the breaking point. Ammunition for the artillery, the one weapon that was holding the Red Army at bay, was projected to run out in 2 weeks. There were no more reserves to call up. The breach of the Mannerheim Line, the encirclement of Viipuri, and the failure of international aid to materialize all pointed to one unavoidable conclusion. They had to make peace. To continue fighting would mean the total conquest of Finland, the end of their independence and their absorption into the Soviet Union as another republic. The thought was unbearable. So, while their soldiers were still dying on the ice of Viipuri Bay, a Finnish delegation secretly traveled to Moscow. The negotiations were not negotiations, they were a dictation. Molotov presented the Soviet terms, which were now far harsher than the ones they had offered before the war. The Finns, with their backs to the wall, had no choice but to accept. On the night of March 12, 1940, the Moscow Peace Treaty was signed. The next day, at 11 a.m., the guns fell silent. The silence on the front was said to be the most shocking thing of all. After 105 days of constant deafening noise, the sudden absolute quiet was unnerving. The war was over. Finland had survived. But the cost was gut-wrenching. The treaty forced Finland to cede 11% of its territory. They lost the entire Karelian isthmus, including their beloved Viipuri. They lost the northern shore of Lake Ladoga. They had to lease the Hanko Peninsula to the Soviets for a naval base. In total, an area larger than Belgium was gone. With it went a huge portion of Finland's industrial capacity. And perhaps most tragically, over 420,000 Karelians, 12% of Finland's population, were forced to abandon their homes. They were given a choice: stay and become Soviet citizens, or leave. Almost without exception, they chose to leave, taking only what they could carry and becoming refugees in their own country. The Winter War was a paradox. Militarily, it was a Finnish defeat. They were forced to sue for peace and surrender territory, but in every other sense, it was a victory of monumental proportions. Finland remained an independent, sovereign nation. Unlike the Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, which were swallowed whole by the USSR shortly after, Finland stayed free. They had fought, and in doing so had earned the right to exist. They had also given the Red Army a bloody nose so severe that it forced Stalin to undertake massive, sweeping reforms of his military. This, ironically, would prove crucial in the Soviet Union's ability to withstand the German invasion a year and a half later. Adolf Hitler, watching the Red Army's pathetic performance, became convinced it was a house of cards, a fatal miscalculation that would lead to his own doom. The Finns lost nearly 26,000 dead and 44,000 wounded, a terrible price for a small nation. But the Soviet losses were astronomical, with estimates running from 150,000 to over 200,000 dead, and many more wounded or crippled by frostbite. The Finns had shown the world what a united people fighting for their homes could do against impossible odds. They had defined the meaning of their national character, sisu, for all time. It wasn't about winning. It was about refusing to be broken. It was about enduring the unendurable, surviving the unsurvivable, and looking a bully in the eye and saying, no. So, was it a victory or a defeat? What do you call it when you lose the battle but save your soul? The Finns call it the miracle of the Winter War. Let me know in the comments what you think and what part of this insane, brutal, and heroic story will stick with you the most.